My mom abandoned me, and my cruel stepdad kicked me out. Years later, they're back begging for help, and I told them this. For the past 5 years, I, an 18-year-old man, have lived with my mother and stepdad. My life changed dramatically when at 10, my biological dad died in a vehicle accident. For my mom as much as for me, it was a trying period. For a few years, we battled both financially and emotionally until my mom met Mark when I was 12. They spent a year dating before getting married when I was 13. Mark clearly didn't like me right from the start. He always saw me as a burden and a continual reminder of my mother's previous relationship. That day they were wedded to me. I noticed Mark staring coldly, calculatedly while everyone was celebrating. Though I dismissed it as simply wedding day nerves, it made me shudder. Growing up, I made every effort to fit in with Mark. Along with maintaining my grades and helping him with yard work or watching football, activities he liked, I worked around the house. Still, it never was sufficient whatever I did. He would always find means to denigrate me or make me unwelcome. Mark would criticize me for not being his actual son or for simply squandering room in his house. If it were up to me, you would be out on the street where you belong, he would say, or, you're lucky your mother loves you because no one else would put up with a useless kid like you. Though they hurt, I tried not to let them define me. When she saw these exchanges, my mother would try to referee, but she usually sided with Mark to diffuse conflict. She might remark, he doesn't mean it that way, or you need to try harder to get along with Mark. In my own house, I felt as though I was continually treading on eggshells. As I aged, things grew worse. Mark insisted on my paying rent when I reached 16 and started working part-time at a nearby grocery store. Though she felt it was a little harsh, my mother agreed it would teach me responsibility. So a good amount of my little pay went to Mark every month, leaving me nothing to save or spend on myself. My mother recently landed an incredible job overseas. She could possibly acquire a permanent job from a 6-month contract she was presented with in Europe. I could see the thrill in her eyes when she initially told me about it. I had not seen her genuinely delighted about something in years. But worries about living alone with Mark soon eclipsed my delight for her. I told my mother about how Mark treated me when she was away, therefore expressing my worries. I related stories of events when he would accidentally ruin items I cared about, such as the model airplane my dad and I created together before he passed away, or how he would forget to buy groceries I could eat knowing I had dietary restrictions. My mother dismissed it, saying Mark was merely tough and I was exaggerating. She advised me to give him an opportunity and that living together might strengthen our relationship. That day my mother left was among the toughest of my life. I hugged her tightly while we stood at the airport, stifling tears. Though I wanted her to stay, to not be left with Mark alone, I couldn't bring myself to slow her down. Mark laid his hand on my shoulder as she passed the security checkpoint. Though his hold was agonizing, to anyone observing it would have looked like a consoling action. His voice chilly, he continued, "Let's go home, boy. Things are going to be different now." And they were different as well. Things plummeted from the time we arrived home. Mark started screaming at me for the most minor transgressions. Should I leave a dish in the sink or arrive home 5 minutes later than usual, he would yell. Once on my way to school, I unintentionally left a light on in my room. Mark had taken out every light bulb from my room when I returned. "You don't deserve to have any if you can't remember to turn off the lights," he remarked, grinning. Saying he was merely letting me stay because of my mother, he threatened to kick me out several times. "One incorrect move," he would counsel, "and you'll be out on the street. And who do you suppose your mother will find credible? Me, her devoted husband, or her unappreciative kid brat?" Though I tried to keep my head down and avoid confrontation, it was getting intolerable. My mental health was failing and I couldn't concentrate on my academics. I was depressed and concerned all the time as my grades began to slide. Several times I called my mother to let her know what was occurring, but she always appeared preoccupied and advised me to sort it out with Mark. Her voice sounded stressed about her new employment, and I didn't want to aggravate her problems. About 2 months into my mother's absence, one evening things got out of control. Covering a sick colleague, I had been working late at my job. When I got home late, I contacted Mark to let him know. But when I got there he was waiting for me, enraged. He accused me of lying, of doing drugs or running afoul of the law. He labeled me useless and declared he was bored with having me around when I tried to explain. Driven by a flash of wrath, he seized a box containing old pictures, my dad's watch, and school keepsakes and threatened to toss them. I begged him to stop, and in the struggle the box dropped and its contents spilled over the floor. Mark topped me as I hurried to gather my things. "This ends now," he snarled. "I will throw you out myself. I want you out of my house by tomorrow." That was the final straw. I knew I couldn't stand it anymore. I packed a bag with basics and departed in the middle of the night once Mark turned in for sleep. After a few days of crashing at my best friend's house, I discovered a small room to rent using part-time job savings. I didn't notify my mother right away since I wanted to spare her from stress and compromise her employment possibility. When she returned, I reasoned I would explain everything. Mark began sending me frightening notes that he would phone the police and report me as a runaway should I not return, so I blocked his number. 1 month now, and I'm getting by on my own. It's not easy. I'm trying to keep up with school while working extra hours to pay for basic needs including rent. Though I hardly eat some days, it's still better than living under Mark's roof. Though I feel bad about leaving without telling my mother, I also feel as though I had little option. Stress and continual fear were breaking me. So Reddit, am I the moron for leaving the house of my stepfather while my mother was overseas? Should I have pushed more to make things work? Should I get in touch with my mother right now and clarify everything? I'm lost and would much benefit from any guidance. Edit. I appreciate your replies, everybody. Having perused them, I value your help. Many of you have inquired about my housing circumstances and future intentions. I came into a modest studio apartment through a buddy of a friend right now. Though I can hear every movement my neighbors make and the plumbing is erratic, it's safe and reasonably priced. To pay for things, I'm part-time instructing online and working at a nearby diner. Regarding education, I am in my senior year and set to graduate. My school counselor has been in contact with me on my circumstances and has been quite helpful in ensuring I remain on target. Others of you advised getting in touch with other relatives. Sadly, my grandma died a few years ago and my mom was an only kid. After his death, my dad's side of the family lost contact with us. Hence, for the past few years, Mark, my mother and I basically have been the only ones in touch. When my mother gets back, I'm not sure how to handle things. Though another part of me wants to tell her everything, I am afraid she won't believe me or will start to side with Mark once more. When I visit the bridge, I suppose I'll cross it. Right now my priorities are finishing school and keeping afloat. Again, thank you everyone for your wise counsel and polite comments. Update 1. After my first post 6 months ago, a lot has happened. I wanted to let everyone know about current affairs. Last week, my mother got back from a work trip overseas. Though I was anxious about meeting her, I also looked forward to at last clarifying all that had happened with Mark. Still, events did not go as I had intended. The day she returned, I got her on the line. Her voice was icy and hostile, not at all the gentle, caring tone I was accustomed to. She insisted on knowing whether it was accurate that I had fled with money taken from Mark. Startled and perplexed, my mind flew to try to figure out where this charge originated. I tried to describe what actually happened. How Mark had been verbally nasty. How he had threatened to kick me out, and how I left for my own safety and mental health. I informed her about the episode involving my box of personal items and about how Mark had made every day she was gone awful. Still, my mother would not pay attention. She insisted non-stop that Mark had shown her proof of my theft. She was evasive when I asked what proof, mentioning missing money and dubious bank activity. I assured her I had never taken anything in my life. It was all falsehoods. She appeared to have her opinion already formed, even though I reminded her of how honest I had always been with her and how hard I had worked at my part-time job to help the house. To enable us to have a face-to-face conversation, I pleaded with her to meet personally. She accepted under some coaxing, but Mark was with her when we met at a neighborhood cafe. My heart dropped the minute I saw him. Though he looked sad, I could see the triumphant gleam in his eyes. Mark presented me with a show of worry and disappointment. He concocted a story about how he had tried his best to look after me while my mom was away, but that I had grown rebellious and begun pilfering money to pay for a party life. He discussed how he had spotted strange withdrawals from their joint account and how he would have noticed cash missing from his wallet. I stumbled. Though he told it so convincingly, every word he spoke was a lie. He even claimed to have fictitious bank records and invoices proving I had been taking money. Though I'm not sure how he made them, they appeared real enough to mislead my mother. He discussed his attempts to approach me about it, but I had fled instead of dealing with the fallout. I tried furiously to explain my side of the narrative and defend myself. I described how I'd been struggling to make ends meet in my tiny apartment and how I'd been working extra shifts to help myself. I mentioned to them the evenings I would have gone to bed hungry as I cannot afford rent as well as food. I begged my mother to remember how I had always been conscientious with money. How I had never given her any cause to question me before. But Mark had obviously been working on my mother for several weeks prior to her comeback. Her belief of me as a troubled, unappreciative child who had seized advantage of her absence was shaped by his poisoning of her against me. He presented himself as the victim, A worried stepfather limited to helping his wayward stepson. Seeing the sight of disappointment and wrath in my mother's eyes was the worst of it. She said she had trusted me to behave while she was away and she couldn't believe I would treat her this way. She accused me of trying to assign blame and fabricating falsehoods about my loving stepfather when I tried to explain about Mark's behavior. Her voice breaking, "How could you do this to us?" she asked. "We gave you everything, this is how you reimburse us?" Her comments ripped right through, each one like a physical blow. Her own son Mark seemed to me incomprehensible as she believed him over me. My mother informed me at the meeting that she wanted time to consider what to do going forward. If she didn't trust me, she stated she cannot have me back in the house. I watched Mark comfort my mother by putting his arm around her shoulders as they exited the eatery. I got queasy looking at it. I kept trying to get in touch with my mother throughout the next few days, hoping she would listen to me free from Mark's influence. She either answered with brief icy texts instructing me to quit lying and take accountability for my behavior or ignored my calls. I was quite hungry. Hoping they may be able to talk some sense into her, I contacted a few of Mom's friends. Alas, it appeared Mark had also gotten to them. They all told me how let down they felt of me. How they couldn't believe I would have stolen from my own household. My mother finally sent me a lengthy text message stating she had decided it would be better if I stayed away from home. She claimed she needed time to get through everything and that she felt rather let down in me. She advised me not to get in touch for a little while. I felt crushed. Along with losing my house, I had lost my mother, the one I considered to be always on my side. Mark had turned her against her own son by totally controlling her. The next several weeks blurted together. Trying to forget the huge void in my life where my family used to be, I pushed myself into work and education. Often lying awake at night, I struggled to fall asleep and found myself wondering what I could have said better to make my mother believe me. I replayed the talks in my mind. My grades began to slide once more, and I ran the danger of not graduating. It took a worried teacher dragging me aside to get me out of my slide back. She questioned what was wrong when she observed my alterations. Hesitantly at first, I told her all. She thought of me surprisingly. She assisted me in contacting a social professional and a school counselor capable of offering me tools and assistance. Their assistance allowed me to get back on track with my academics and even obtain some extra financial aid to cover living expenses. I'm now figuring out my next moves. Working as hard as I can to support myself, I am still in my little flat. I have contacted a few reliable teachers at the institution who have been encouraging and guiding me through independent finishing of high school. About the future, I'm terrified, angry and wounded. My mother's treachery aches especially, and there are days when the loneliness feels unbearable. But I also want to prove Mark mistaken and show my mother the truth at last. Though I have not given up hope totally, I am not sure if our connection will ever be the same. Right now, I'm mostly planning for college and finishing off high school. Though it won't be simple, I am resolved to lead a better life for myself whether or not my family supports it. I appreciate your support of my original post everywhere. I would really appreciate any guidance on how one might go from here. How might I recover from this betrayal? When I feel so alone, how can I design a life for myself? Any advice would be appreciated. Update 2, 5 years later. My last update 5 years ago and my life has altered drastically. I wanted to let others know what had happened and obtain some viewpoint on a most recent development. After high school, I threw myself into my education and job. Though I still felt the loss of my family hard, I turned that suffering into will. Majoring in computer science, I secured a scholarship at a state institution. I balanced several part-time jobs to make ends meet. Freelancing web design, working at the university library, and even weekend pizza delivery. Though it was demanding, college also released me. Living with Mark, I felt free from the continual anxiety and terror that had dogged me for the first time in years. To help me through the pain of my past, I began visiting a therapist and befriended people who grew to be like family. After graduating with honors, I found work directly out of college at a bright tech startup. Though I worked long hours and under great pressure, the work was challenging and I loved that challenge. Being appreciated for my work ethic and abilities felt fantastic, something I hadn't lately experienced. I have ascended in the company during the last 3 years. Originally a junior developer, the higher-ups were drawn to my commitment and creative ideas. Within a year, I was elevated to team lead. Lately, I was assigned lead developer for our primary offering. Our startup recently attracted a sizable investment, which sent us into the major tech industry ranks. Along with stock options that might be quite valuable should the business keep expanding, this brought a sizable pay rise for me. For the first time in my life, I am comfortable as well as financially steady. Along with moving into a decent apartment and even beginning to save money for the future, I bought my first car. I never spoke with Mark or my mother during this period. Particularly during holidays and events like my college graduation and career promotions, it was difficult. There were evenings when I would lie awake wondering whether my mother ever considered me, whether she ever regretted choosing Mark above me. But I concentrated on starting a new life for me and assembling a selected family including mentors and close friends. Out of the blue last week, I got a call from an unidentified number. My response caused a hush, then I heard a voice I hadn't heard 5 years ago. Mom was it. Her voice sounded worn out and desperate, nothing like the confident, loving mother I knew from my early years. She informed me Mark and she were having money problems. Mark apparently had some poor investments, and their property was about to go under foreclosure. Mark has been unemployed for the past year since his company he worked for filed for bankruptcy. They were drowning in debt after devouring their savings. My mother said she was sorry for all that had transpired years ago. Her voice broke as she said she had come to see Mark had controlled her over time. She admitted she had been carrying guilt for years and she regretted not trusting me. She asked whether we might get together to try to heal our relationship and to go over things. I froze. I had dreamed of this for years, my mother recognizing the truth and reaching out to re-establish contact. Now that it was occurring though, I experienced a rush of emotions, optimism, resentment, grief, and residual betrayal. After a protracted silence, I decided to see her at a cafe, the same one where we had our confrontation 5 years earlier. It startled me to find Mark and my mother there when I got there. With her grayed hair and worried lined face, my mother seemed older and exhausted. Mark's shoulders dropped and his eyes downcast suggested he had lost the cocky air he formerly possessed. More specifically, they said they were months behind on their mortgage payments and that the bank threatened to seize their residence. When his company closed, Mark lost his career. Even now, he has struggled to find consistent employment. Teacher pay for my mother was insufficient to pay living expenses and debt. I observed as they spoke the dynamic between them had altered. Often breaking off or correcting Mark, my mother looked more forceful. Mark, on the other hand, seemed subdued, a far cry from the dominant man I recalled. The true reason they reached out was to ask whether I might provide them loans to enable them to get back on their feet. Having heard through mutual friends about my achievements in the tech sector, they thought I would be in a position to be of use. Sitting there, I listened to their appeal and experienced a range of feelings. Part of me felt vindicated. Years ago Mark had lied and exploited the circumstances, and at last they were owning this. Another side of me, though, was resentment at their only outreach when they required something from me. Mom grabbed my hand in hers across the table. Tears in her eyes. "I know we don't deserve your help," she added. "We are desperate even though what we did to you was awful. We have nowhere else to turn." Mark joined in, his voice missing the assurance it had previously possessed. "I know you have every cause to hate me," he continued. "I treated you cruelly. I let everything be poisoned by my insecurity and jealousy. Though I am really sorry for what I did, I am not asking for pardon." Their apologies set off past hurts and memories. I considered the lonely evenings in my small apartment, battling poverty. I recalled the sense of betrayal when my own mother decided to accept a falsehood instead of her son's reality. I told them I needed time to consider it once they had finished speaking and inhaled deeply. I promised nothing when I left the cafe. Their begging gaze trailed after me. I'm divided now. One hand, I have worked hard for my accomplishment and I do not believe I owe them anything based on their treatment of me. Mark's falsehoods ruined my bond with my mother and drove me to fend for myself when young. Part of me wants to turn away and let them deal with the results of their behavior. Still, even with everything, I worry about my mother. Though I worry that if I assist her, I would be exposing myself to more manipulation or demands of continuous support. The idea of her being homeless or struggling hurts my heart. The way this could affect my own financial stability worries me as well. I'm not sure whether I could afford to save them without sacrificing my own future, even if right now I'm doing great. The startup scene is erratic, hence my present success is not sure to last. One more issue is forgiveness. Can I really get beyond what transpired? After such a great betrayal, is it possible to repair a relationship with my mother? And then regarding Mark. Can I ever trust him or have him back in my life even as he apologies? Unable to decide, I have been debating these questions for the past week. I discussed it with my closest friends and even mentioned it in a session with my therapist. Though everyone has different ideas, finally they all say the same: it is my decision to make. Part of me is driven to be a great person and offer an olive branch of support. Perhaps this is the first step toward mending past hurts and reconstructing my relationship with my mother. Another side of me, meanwhile, is terrified of subjecting myself to the suffering I have so battled once more. So on Reddit, I find myself wondering once more. Am I bad if I refuse to assist my mother and stepdad financially following all that has happened? Should I provide them another chance or guard the life I have created or myself? I could really appreciate some outside view because I find myself at a crossroads. My stepmother abused my fiance's young brother, causing a family rift that threatens to destroy our wedding and relationships forever. Original post, mention of child Abu *e. It's not too graphic, but it's there. I tried posting this on AIDA through a different account a couple days ago, but it didn't work out. Given the trigger warning, I'm not surprised. I have since concluded my wife and I did the right thing, so this will be my last attempt to post this story. I tried to add some info and change the wording a little. All names are fake. My 28M stepmother, 49F, is a wannabe party planner. She has taken it upon herself to plan and host every party and holiday my dad's family has thrown since she married him. I never loved those occasions growing up. She's controlling and gets upset if people complain about anything, but humored her for my dad's sake. According to him, this helps her feel included. I'm getting married to my fiancée Jane, 26F, in July. We got engaged in early 2021, but Jane ended up getting pregnant a couple months after that, and we decided to postpone the wedding to focus on our son for a while. So we've had a long engagement. My stepmother has tried to hijack our wedding plans from day one, complaining, contacting our planner, showing up unannounced to Jane's dress appointments, etc. And we have repeatedly asked her to stop. Dad wants us to humor her, but she's clearly resentful of the fact that she's not hosting the wedding or being labeled mother of the groom in invitations. Besides our baby boy, we also have Luke, 4M, Jane's paternal half-brother. She got custody of him a few months into our relationship, after his parents died. I ended up moving in with them during the pandemic, and have been in Luke's life since he was a baby. He doesn't call me dad, and refers to us as his sister and his OP, but we love him like a son. Stepmother though hates Luke. She accuses Jane of baby trapping her way into the family. That accusation only got worse after our son was born. My dad gets along with Jane and adores the kids, but stepmother demands him to refuse babysitting Luke, so we don't leave the kids with them often. Instead, Jane's brother and CL usually watch the kids for us, as their children are close to ours in age. We had a thing last Sunday, and my Bill was out of town with his family. Jane's other siblings live in different cities, as well as my mom and sister. My dad agreed to babysit at our place and we left. We came back to find both kids crying, stepmother screaming, and dad weakly trying to calm everyone down. Apparently, Luke had told stepmother that both he and our son were going to be our ring bearers, and she went ballistic. She screamed that she wasn't going to allow that because he wasn't family. She then made me need to include the trigger warning when he started crying. His lip is still split. She'd never gotten to this point before. We immediately banned her from our house and from our wedding. Dad is fuming and has said he's not going without her. He's also convinced half of his side of the family, by severely downplaying what stepmother did, to boycott the wedding as well. This includes my stepbrother, who fully agrees with his mother no matter how many times I try to tell him the truth. Me and Jane are refusing to budge, but many of my cousins who aren't coming anymore are asking us to reconsider. Pretty much all of Jane's family agrees with us, but one of her aunts has suggested that maybe stepmother is acting out because she doesn't feel welcomed by my family. I've honestly had it with my family enabling her behavior. I love my dad and really want him at my wedding, but I am more than willing to go NC if it means protecting my family. Edit. I think I accidentally deleted the paragraph where I mentioned this, but we did press charges. We took Luke to the pediatrician the next day and gathered every piece of evidence we had. Not only did we have pictures of Luke's face, but by some miraculous strike of luck, we also had nanny cam footage. Some commenters were right to assume that my SM hadn't been invited to our house, but my dad hasn't really gone anywhere without her in years, so we took precautions. We didn't expect her to actually do anything this awful, but we've never trusted her with the kids. The physical attack happened off camera, but there is some footage of her screaming and Luke crying before and after the event. She now has a child abuse charge on her rap sheet. We wouldn't let her get away with this. Edit 2. There is a lot of additional info I want to add. I'll try to respond to at least some of the comments. I did not expect the amount I've gotten so far, but all I'll add for now is that Luke is okay. The visit to the pediatrician happened the day after. He already had a counselor. Jane was pretty traumatized when her dad and stepmom died, and was worried it would rub off on him, and will continue treatment. We've been hugging and pampering him a little more than usual too. He's still upset, but is already doing much better. Update 1. I want to thank everybody who took the time to read and/or comment on my previous post. It's been a tough week, but it's always great to know that people care. I haven't been able to reply to every comment, but I will try to address some in this update. This might get a little long. I'll start off by saying that me and Jane are going NC with my dad and SM. We haven't really spoken to either of them since the incident, and I don't plan on being the one to reach out. Any communication between us is being handled by my younger sister. She's completely on our side, but will remain in low contact for the time being. I've decided to adopt Jane's way of dealing with people she cares about. Forgive what's apologized for, but never forget. Basically, if Dad or SM ever truly understand what they did wrong and sincerely apologize, we're willing to forgive them. Even if begrudgingly so, but we will never ignore, or let them forget, what they did to our family. And for the time being, neither of them will be allowed near Luke, our baby, and any other kids we may have in the future, even if we do forgive them. As for the rest of my family, I read a lot of comments suggesting that I post pictures of Luke's face, as well as the nanny cam footage. I'm not very active on social media, but even if I was, I'm not comfortable exposing my injured preschooler like that, especially given that nothing on the internet ever truly goes away. I also decided not to share the pictures with my family unless truly necessary. I should probably mention that while my family adores my dad, most of them aren't very fond of SM. She had 2 failed marriages prior to meeting my father, the first of which resulted in my stepbrother, and he cheated on his then girlfriend to be with her. My family loved that girlfriend and disliked SM right away. Not only has she been controlling and manipulative since the beginning, she's also tried to force her way into the family matriarch role by any means possible. Taking over planning duties for every family event was her favorite way to do it, because of all the attention and compliments that come with it. The main reason why I hated these parties growing up was because she'd always find a way to make everything about her, including Christmas and mine and my sister's birthdays. The rest of the family felt neutral about it, but they never liked her. With Luke, it was different. Most of my relatives didn't meet him until COVID restrictions got looser, and by then he was 2 years old. He's a bright and genuinely lovable kid, and there weren't really any other small children in the family, so everyone immediately started cooing over him. The way I see it, SM got upset that Jane and Luke were accepted by my family so easily compared to her experience, and that's why she resents them both, but I can't confirm that. She was also mad that, aside from not being the planner, she would have absolutely no involvement in the wedding party. She tried to pressure us into letting her officiate. One of Jane's best friends was offered that role a year ago, making stepbrother my best man. He wasn't interested and I'd already gotten my best friend. Or asking her sister's daughter to be our flower girl. We'd promised Jane's 3-year-old niece, also her sister's daughter is 15 and doesn't know us. She also tried to convince us to let my dad walk Jane down the aisle, since her father's gone, but her eldest brother, the Bill I mentioned in the first post, had already been enlisted. SM was disappointed that my family wasn't as involved in the wedding as Jane's, and kept making comments about how that would never happen if we put her in charge. All of that being said, there's nothing that can excuse being that awful to a child, especially if it really is the petty jealousy that I suspect. Because I haven't spoken with my father, my sister has been keeping me updated on what he's been up to. As I found out through her, the story my dad and SM told the rest of the family completely erases Luke's injury and the abuse charges. It insinuates that me and Jane banned them because we got annoyed with SM and decided to take it out on my dad as well. Because most people already disliked SM, explaining what actually happened that night wasn't hard, and most of the relatives that I actually wanted at the wedding have apologized and are berating my dad as well. The people that didn't believe us, as well as those saying we overreacted, have been told they are not welcome in our home anymore. Those are mostly people from my dad's generation, so I can't say I'm surprised. But the realization that they are so biased they're willing to protect a woman they hate, after she hurt a child, just to make my dad happy has reassured me that I don't need any of them in my life. Stepbrother is still in denial. He refuses to believe his mother could hurt a child, even with all the evidence we have. I have to admit I understand. I love my mom too, but that doesn't mean I'd excuse his obliviousness. So he's banned too. It sucks, because we were close growing up, but I don't regret it. Besides, Jane has 3 other siblings besides Luke, the older Bill, a twin brother and a younger sister, and I'm closer to them than I ever was to him. Speaking of Jane's family, they're all furious over what happened, and have been extremely supportive of us. Jane's maternal family basically adopted Luke after she got custody of him, and have called frequently to make sure he's okay. We did manage to save some money with everybody we uninvited, and have decided to use it to help Jane's cousin. She lives in a different country, and was previously unable to come to the wedding, so we're paying for her plane ticket. Luke has gotten much better, and is almost completely back to being the sunny child he's always been. The split lip was shallow. It's healing slowly, but didn't require any stitches. We sat him down a few days ago and explained that my dad and stepmonster wouldn't be around anymore. He really liked my dad but understands that he and SM are attached at the hip. He's clearly scared of her, but we're doing our best to make him feel safe. Me and Jane have reassured him that he is family, we love him and no one will ever change that. I'm not too worried about Dad or SM trying to show up at the wedding, but we've alerted the venue and given them pictures just in case they try anything. Better safe than sorry. Some people brought attention to the fact that SM is a hypocrite for saying Luke isn't family. I agree, for obvious reasons. Her main excuse for pretty much everything she does is that she doesn't feel like my family welcomes her. Dad has been guilting me to take part in everything she plans by reminding us of that for as long as I can remember. The way he continues to make excuses for her without realizing this is basically a case of the pot calling the kettle black, except Luke actually is family, is what has made me accept that, while I will always love my dad, it's not healthy or safe for me and my family to be around him anymore. It hurts to know my son won't have his only remaining bio-grandfather in his life, but he has two amazing step-grandpas to make up for it. For now, I'm sad, but satisfied with how things have turned out. I don't like to complain about my life. It's a mess, but a beautiful one. I love my fiancé, I love my kids, and I'm lucky enough to love my job. We're happy. I'm not letting anyone ruin that. To whoever was annoyed at my censorship. When posting on AITA didn't work out, Jane suggested I make the writing less explicit. I'm not used to Reddit yet, so I might have overdone it a little bit. I hope this is my last update on this story, but I'll keep you posted. Again, thank you for all your love and support. Best wishes to all of you. Relevant comments from OOP. The only reason why I know that this is the first time she's hit him is because this was the first and last time she was with the kids unsupervised. Me and Jane were around every previous time she saw Luke. She didn't want my dad to babysit him, and we'd only asked him to on a few occasions before. My sister was still living with them at the time, and has assured me that Luke was never out of her sight. I know and trust my sister enough to believe her. First time or not, I will not give her a second chance. She'll never hurt either of my kids again. OOP when told to secure passwords with all vendors. We've actually had passwords with the vendors since day one. Some of the earlier ones we met actually recommended us to do it. SM did contact our planner a while back saying she had our approval to talk to our vendors. She didn't let her, and we got a bit more strict with passwords after that. Commenter, so is SM serving any jail time? If she attacked a child then and you guys pressed charges, I would imagine she would have to be processed and eventually serve some time for her crime. OOP, we hope so. We're setting up a date for the arraignment. Commenter, start a file for SM. Keep any and all texts, voicemails and attempts of her communicating. Do the same with anyone who has taken her side because she could escalate, and you may need that info. Those people are flying monkeys and she's sent them to not only plead her case, but report back to her the things you may have told them so she can continue to play her victim card. You were great to have the nanny cam, but should also make sure to notify his daycare or school that she is not to be given info or access to him. Get cameras that have audio just in case she shows up at your house and password protect all of your wedding vendors and let them know not to give her any info and to notify you if she tries. Your dad may be harmless, but she's not. OOP. That second advice is something we've been pretty occupied with, actually. This past week has been mostly about the kids and collecting evidence, but I'll definitely check out the JN Mill sub. Commenter, did you say that if your father and stepmonster apologize that you will allow them at your wedding? I wasn't quite sure what you were saying. OOP, absolutely not. My father and SM are not welcome at the wedding, no matter the circumstances. They could offer me an island and I'd still refuse to let them come back into our lives right now. I only plan to forgive anything far off in the future, and only if they apologize sincerely. Even then, they will have no access to the kids for years after that. Knowing SM, I highly doubt she'll ever feel sorry for what she did, so we're not counting on it anyway. Update 2. I'll start off by, probably, disappointing a lot of people. We're coming to terms with the fact that it's unlikely SM will get anything more than a slap on the wrist. Me and Jane are discussing our next move with our lawyer, but we're still not sure how we're going to move forward. It's too early to tell anyway, so we're trying not to get ahead of ourselves any more than we already have. However, I'm relieved to announce that we're getting started on the process for a restraining order against SM. We're using the same evidence we gathered the week following the incident, including the nanny cam footage and pictures of Luke, and we'll focus on that for the time being. I still haven't spoken to my father. My sister is still in LC, but is seriously considering cutting ties with him. Because my sister is the only one on my side that still talks to him, my father keeps trying to ask her about me, and whether I've calmed down, yet. According to her, he's annoyed that half of his family refuses to talk to him, but still doesn't seem to accept why. I told my sister that she doesn't need to keep playing messenger pigeon between me and our father. I never asked her to do it, and it's clearly taking a toll on her. But she insists she'll stop when it feels right. By the way, there's absolutely no doubt whether SM attacked Luke. Not only did Luke say at the moment we got home, but that was also confirmed by my father in a failed attempt to defend her behavior. He never tried to hide it from us. That, and the fact that he gave Luke an ice bag, is literally the only positive thing I can say about his actions. And SM was too busy screaming about how much of a whining brat Luke was being to deny it. To those who guessed SM is younger than my dad, you get an invisible cookie. She's also 5 years younger than his previous girlfriend. They got together when I was around 15. Also, my stepbrother is only a month older than me. She turns 50 later this year, had him at 21, married his father a year later. Both our kids are doing mostly okay. Luke's back to running around the house in his Superman costume whenever he doesn't have anything better to do. He did have a few nightmares this past week, and is asked to sleep on our bed twice. We don't mention my father around him, and he's still seeing his counselor. Our 14-month-old son has learned 2 new words, hi and bye, and Luke is trying to teach him to say his name. Jane's sister, who moved away for college, is coming over for a couple days to celebrate her 21st birthday later this month. Luke's excited to see her, and Jane's excited to get drunk with her. Can't say I blame her. We're hoping her presence will cheer us all up. I'm not doing so good, and neither is Jane. She's usually the kind of person who tries to keep her negative emotions to herself, but she cried herself to sleep almost every night the week it happened. It breaks my heart to see her like that, and I can't help but feel like this is my fault. There's a part of me trying to tell myself I had no way of knowing SM would do anything like that, but that doesn't really change anything. I allowed my father near my kids unsupervised, even though I knew she'd probably tag along. This is the guiltiest I've ever felt, and I don't think I'll ever forgive myself. Jane has been improving lately, and is trying to convince me to see a therapist. I've never really done that before, apart from a psychiatrist when I was younger, but now feels like a good time to give it a try. I was surprised by a few messages this week from people telling me to forgive my father and SM, as well as re-invite them to the wedding. That's not happening. In fact, I'm not willing to ever forgive SM. My dad has now degraded to a huge maybe, but I will never understand or forget what she did. Also, though the wedding is the last thing on our minds right now, we're not postponing it. We considered rescheduling, but the date we'd settled on is pretty much the only one that works for our guests. We have passwords with all our vendors, and gave them all clear instructions not to talk to anyone but us. Jane's family is bigger and closer to each other, which is why they're more involved in the wedding than mine, but I do have family participating. My sister is one of the bridesmaids, 2 of my cousins are groomsmen, and my mom is walking down the aisle with the wedding party. Going through all of this with Jane has made me understand even more just how much I love this woman. I couldn't ask for a better partner to start a family with, and I have no idea what I'd do without her. This didn't tear us apart, and I couldn't be more thankful. I probably won't make any more updates until after the wedding, unless something big happens. In the meantime, as always, best wishes to all of you. Update 3. I didn't plan on updating again before the wedding, but something pretty huge happened. The good news is we got the RO. The bad news is me and Jane had to see both SM and my father at the court hearing. This was our first time seeing them since we kicked them out of our house over a month ago, and neither of us were looking forward to it. We left the kids with Jane's brother and Sil, so at least Luke didn't have to see them. The hearing itself went a lot quicker than I expected. I'll give credit where it's due. My father was, at the very least, smart enough to understand there was no way they were winning this. There was a lot of evidence against them. Not only did we have the nanny cam footage and Luke's pictures and medical record, but my sister had also gathered every text and email SM had sent her and the family about what happened. And SM hates speaking on the phone, so there were a lot of those. They didn't even bother to get an attorney for the hearing. The judge granted us a protection order against SM. She's not allowed within 500 feet of us or our property anymore. We're changing all our locks this week, and I'm thinking about changing my phone number as well. I have to admit, the moment we left the courthouse was the safest I'd felt since this whole ordeal started. Jane was close to tearing up with joy when we got to the car. We picked up the kids and went to McDonald's with Bill and his family to celebrate. Hours later, my father called me. The order doesn't extend to him, so he can still do that. Jane and the kids were in bed, so I answered. I didn't expect him to change his mind and apologize all of a sudden, but decided to give him one last chance. He tried to start some awkward small talk, but I told him to get to the point. He asked me if the order was truly necessary. I stated, very clearly, that SM was never coming near Jane or my children again, and that I was glad I had an RO to formalize that. Every excuse he had for SM was pretty easy to shut down, but she only hit him once. Yep, and that's enough for me. The kids need their grandma. She's not their grandma, Mom is. She's my wife. You need to respect her. She attacked Luke, she disrespected my family in my own house. I don't owe her anything, least of all my respect. He then went on a rant about family, how much of a godsend SM was and everything she'd done for me and my sister since she came into our lives. I replied by listing every time I could remember about her lying, overstepping a boundary or acting unhinged around me, my family or my sister. I brought up both my adult life and my youth. Examples included her attempts to hijack most of our milestones, recently, our wedding plans, our son's birth, Jane's baby shower and my sister's college graduation. Her obsession with the idea of a perfect family, and her disgusting attitude towards Luke. I also made sure to mention her habits of going through mine and my sister's stuff when we were younger. It's trivial, compared to everything else, but this behavior went on until my sister moved out of their house, only 3 months ago. We're pretty sure she found out about Jane's wedding dress appointments by reading my sister's planner while she wasn't home, for instance. Some of the memories I mentioned are long and hard to explain, but they did cement the fact that SM means nothing to me. He tried to go with the whole, she doesn't feel included excuse again, but I shut him up. I said he'd had the opportunity to protect his grandchildren, but had chosen his monster of a wife instead, and that's enough for me to want nothing to do with him. I hung up without saying goodbye. My sister told me he called her afterwards, and she told him she was going NC with him as well. I think we're both starting to accept our father won't change. It sucks, but he's made his priorities clear, and his children and grandkids aren't among them. For now, that's it. Now that they're fresh in my mind, I'm thinking about sharing some of the stories I reminded my father of, but that's gonna take a while. Until then, as always, best wishes to all of you. Relevant comments. Commenter, but she only hit him once would have ended the phone call for me. OOP, I almost hung up on him when he said that. The only reason I didn't was because I knew I wasn't gonna talk to him again anytime soon, and I still had a lot to say. Commenter. I am curious how your stepbrother is handling all of this. Like, the RO is something you can't just push away. A judge stated that what his mother did was so terrible she needed to stay away from those children. It just feels like something you can't stick your head in the sand and claim that you could never believe that your mother could hurt someone like that. OOP, I haven't spoken to him since days before the RO, and he hasn't tried to contact me or my sister. He was still in denial last time we talked, but seemed a bit doubtful. TBH, I think he's the only one who isn't a complete lost cause and still has a slight chance of coming around. He's still banned, but I might be willing to talk to him about this whole thing. Commenter. Holy hell. If you are comfortable sharing, I know many of us would want to hear those hijacking stories. Hope the kids don't have too terribly long an impact on their life from this, especially the preschooler. OOP. Luke hasn't mentioned her in a while. I don't doubt he was affected by this, but I think he understands everything is okay now. Our baby is barely a year old. And if it's up to me, he won't even know she exists until he's grown. I'll definitely share some of the stories as soon as I can bring myself to write them down. Commenter. It's crazy how the court gave your dad a chance not to give him the protection order and you gave him a chance to explain on the phone and he still managed to screw up. You guys gave so many chances and your dad fails to see that SM is a bad person. Your dad doesn't seem like he's going to change, and until he does, somehow stop giving him more chances. OP, that was his last chance, and he blew it. If he ever comes around, and that's a big if, it'll still take me a long time to allow him back into our lives. Update 4. After being engaged for over 2 years, me and Jane finally got married last Saturday. We're still getting used to calling each other husband and wife, but we'll get there. Hopefully. The wedding was awesome. The kids had fun, our extended families finally met, and we danced so much I could barely stand the next day. Luke took his ring-bearer duties seriously, and held my son's hand as they walked down the aisle. Besides my aunt getting shit-faced and being let out on a wheelchair, which I already thought would happen anyway, everything went according to plan. It's been 4 months since we got the RO against SM. Things have been mostly quiet, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Except completely quiet, but we can't always get what we want. I never really worried about SM showing up at the wedding, especially after the RO. It's literally illegal for her to come close to us, and we made it very clear that if she tried, we'd call the cops right away. My friend still warned me to take safety measures, most of which I did. SM didn't show up, of course, but I'm a strong believer that any money spent on security is well spent, so no regrets on that end. My stepbrother and I wished each other happy birthdays, and he also texted Jane on hers back in June. That's the only contact we've had during these months. He knows that the door is still open if he wants to apologize. My dad has given up on trying to reach me. We haven't spoken since April. He's still trying to talk to my sister, for some reason, but she's ignoring him. A few days after she went NC with him, they had a huge fight over the phone about SM's treatment of us over the years. Insults were thrown, sore subjects were brought up, and, most importantly, my father took SM's side on almost everything. My sister called me crying afterwards. I wanted to call him and yell at him, but she told me not to. She's doing okay now. She hasn't blocked him, but doesn't take his calls or answer his texts. She's only gotten 3, a weak apology, one on my birthday back in May, and a long rant after neither of us wished him a happy Father's Day. After all, despite our differences, he's still our father. He's not wrong. I love my father, and I always will, but I can't be around him anymore. While I've closed that door, I'm not locking it just yet. He knows what he needs to do if he wants his family back. I don't think he'll do it, but if there's the slightest chance he might, I'll consider opening the door an inch or two. This is my wife's suggestion. I'm a lot less optimistic than she is, but maybe it's important to hold on to that hope. She hasn't forgiven him though. Or SM, Jane has always been very protective of Luke, so it was no surprise that this disaster shook her. A part of me was scared she'd blame me, but she called me a dumbass when I told her that. I've been in therapy for a few months and it's helped a lot more than I thought it would. I've realized SM's behavior around me growing up was a lot worse than I always thought, and it's great to finally be able to get my feelings off my chest. Right now, I'm more than happy. I just married the most amazing woman ever, and I have the family I always dreamed of. None of us are perfect, but I never thought life would be this great to me. I'll stick around. Reddit is a lot more than I expected, but I can sleep peacefully now, so it's safe to say this will be my last update on this. Thank you all for the kindness and advice you gave me these months. I could have never expected the support I got from you guys, and I can't begin to describe how helpful it was. Seriously, thank you all. Edit 3 days later. Okay, I updated too soon. I didn't want to write another post, so I'll just add this here. My stepbrother called me earlier today. Apparently, he and SM had a fight and he wants to meet up. I agreed as long as it was just the two of us. We're meeting up for coffee on Wednesday. I have no idea what to expect, but even if he does apologize, I need to know he understands how and why he let us down. New update. Hey guys. I've been away from Reddit for a few months, due to some stuff at work. But a lot of people have been messaging me about my stepbrother, so I want to give you a small update. I've been busy and tired these days, so I might gloss over some details. Feel free to ask me anything. I first met my stepbrother for coffee back in August. He'd had a fight with SM and the RO was brought up. She'd lied to him about some details, accusing Luke of picking on my baby, badmouthing Jane and more, but this time, he managed to force her to tell him the truth. My stepbrother started to reevaluate his relationship with his mother. After talking to his therapist and his friends about it, as well as the way she'd raised him, he finally accepted I wasn't exaggerating about what she did to Luke. He wanted to talk to me back in June, but didn't want to distract me and Jane from the wedding. Me and my stepbrother spent the last 4 months working on rebuilding our relationship. We've been meeting for coffee or lunch and discussing his mother and what she did to our lives and my kids. Jane started joining us in October, and the kids saw him again for the first time 2 weeks ago. Things were awkward between us for a while, but we're good now. He's also making amends with my sister. In early November, he completely cut contact with SM. Jane and the kids are doing amazing. Luke turned 5 in September, and our baby will be 2, holy crap, in early February. We're spending the holidays with Jane's family in Brazil, while my stepbrother stays with his girlfriend. Things are great, that's all. I'm signing off for now. I'll let you know if anything happens. Happy holidays, everyone. Best wishes to all of you. Am I the asshole for refusing to raise my husband's children from his affair now that he and the woman he cheated with have passed away? Sorry for using a new account. I know that's a red flag, but I don't want to risk using my old Reddit account. My 45F husband, 49M, of 23 years has been having an affair with a 20 years old girl since 2020. I found out this year when his affair partner gave birth to twin boys in March. Obviously we were going to divorce. We've been hashing things out since. It's been a lengthy process due to some properties in common and we needed to get an accountant since he used the shared account for his affair. Finally things seemed to be getting close to the end when both my husband and the woman he cheated with were killed in a car crash. By some miracle the twin babies were not harmed in the crash. Now they are orphaned and neither set of grandparents can take them in permanently. My husband's parents are both in assisted living, he has no siblings and the only aunt that could take them refuses. She's been child-free her whole life. On the woman's side, I'm not sure the details in full, but her parents are also not able to be involved long-term and the one sister she has lives overseas. Since we were still married and he had not updated his will, all his assets are set to pass to me and our 2 children. I'm not callous enough to leave those babies with nothing, so I agreed to let whoever is their legal guardian to have the remaining balance in the shared account. About $25,000 in savings. The issue is no one wants to take them in. Now my in-laws are pressuring me to take them in and raise them. The issue is, I don't want to. At all. I wouldn't love them and I don't want to be the evil stepmother. But I know a big part of me will always have a level of resentment towards them. I will probably favor my own children. It's not their fault, but I truly loved my husband and I thought we were happy before I found out about the affair. We have 2 daughters, 14 and 16. Obviously we had disagreements, but never insulted each other before. Then I found out about the affair and he began calling me names and blaming me for his cheating. He became abusive and even tried to kick me off the house, my childhood home that is not shared property for the record. I'm also raising teenagers alone now. I don't have the energy to raise babies anymore. My daughters hate their baby brothers. I tried to get them to spend time with their dad as we were divorcing, but they refused. Since this all was found out because of the babies, there wasn't really a way to sugarcoat the situation. And they are also too old to really get away with it. Most of my friends agree it's not my place to care for those children, but my in-laws, the affair woman's parents and my mother want me to raise them. I know my mom is just having grandkids fever, but it hurts to not have her support. I have to make a decision by next week or the boys will be going into foster care. At the moment they are temporarily placed with their maternal grandparents. I feel horrible, but I am very sure I can't take them in. Small update. Hey everyone, this blew up far more than I thought, and I appreciate the well wishes for my girls, the boys and myself. Also for the amount of lovely people offering to see about giving the twins a good home. I might not be their mother, but it does touch me and makes me glad there's good people out there. After thinking carefully and speaking to my lawyer, reading responses, doing research, etc. I plan to speak to the grandparents tomorrow and refuse to take legal guardianship of the boys. I will let them know of the usernames of people that offered meetings for private adoptions or fostering, but my daughters are my priority. It'll be up to the twins' grandparents to decide if they'll proceed with adoption, keep them, or turn them to the state. I wish I had the mental capacity to be the person to do this, but I have 2 girls that are going through a lot and they need my full attention. I'll also be talking to the lawyers to figure out if the boys have any inheritance claim properly. If they do, I'll separate it and leave it to the lawyers to do what they need to do for them to have access when it's best. If they don't, I'll find a way to ensure they have access to the $25,000 I was going to give them since the beginning. I won't do more however. My moral compass might be biased, but I don't believe I'm obligated neither morally or legally to do more than what the word of law says. I can't help everyone and I shouldn't have to. I have 2 girls that lost their father, 2 girls that need therapy, 2 girls just about to get to college. They've gone through enough without seeing their mother favor the children of their father's mistress. I was discriminated against all my life because of my golden child sister. Finally, I got my sweet revenge on my wedding day. I faced discrimination my entire life because of my golden child sister, and she even tried to walk down the aisle at my wedding. Finally, I got my revenge. My parents always favored my sister and it was far from subtle. If she accused me of something, they'd believe her and punish me. But if I accused her, even with undeniable proof, they'd give her a lighter punishment and find a way to scold me too. My birthday cake always had to be her favorite flavor, and my parents pretend they didn't know I hated it. They always bought her more than me and took us where she wanted, even if it was supposed to be about me. My sister grew up spoiled and used me as a punching bag. At first, she mostly ignored me, but things got worse when we were teens. She ended up with no friends, and her behavior deteriorated. Did her friends move away or ditch her because she was mean? I don't know because we were never close. My parents boasted about her achievements but never mentioned any issues, whereas they constantly highlighted my flaws as teasing material. I only knew she had no friends because we went to the same school, and I noticed she was no longer with people. Meanwhile, I was fairly popular. My sister realized this and suddenly turned me from an occasional punching bag to someone she needed to take down constantly. She started accusing me and my friends of more things. My parents stopped letting me hang out with anyone, with excuses like, "They're not good people according to your sister," or, "Why are you trying to leave us? Why can't you be like your sister and enjoy family time?" What saved me from complete isolation was my extended family. Most of them lived in the same hometown, and I got along well with my cousins despite some age differences. At one gathering, they invited me to something. I don't remember what, and I sadly replied that I wasn't allowed to go anywhere. When asked why, my kid self bluntly said it was because I wasn't allowed to have friends since my sister didn't have any. This got back to the adults, who apparently tore my parents apart later. I was scolded for lying and grounded for a month, but after that, they gave me some leeway, so it was worth it. My sister changed schools. I guess the humiliation of our extended family knowing her social status was too much, so she demanded to switch, and my parents immediately obliged. Even though it cost them more since the school was further away, she made friends at the new school. However, she never went back to mostly ignoring me. Having felt the power to mess with me and being angry that I told the family she had no friends, she never let me go. My life remained difficult. Her friends would come over and bully me, which my parents called light teasing. I never invited friends over because my parents were awful hosts, or my sister would accuse them of stealing, and my parents would believe her. I did become close to my cousins though, as my parents never dared to treat family that way. Then I got my first boyfriend. I didn't want to bring him home, but my parents insisted. At one point we were separated and he came to find me to tell me my sister was flirting with him. She came over in skimpy clothing, batting her eyelashes, and started telling him how bad I was and how good she was. He was irked and ran off to find me. Of course, my sister told my parents a different story, that my boyfriend had tried to flirt with her, but she naturally refused since she couldn't do that to me. Guess who my parents believed? My boyfriend wasn't perfect, but I immediately believed him for a mean reason. Remember, I was a teen suffering from unfair treatment. I was very resentful and moody and hated my sister as much as she hated me. With that disclaimer out of the way, let's talk about looks. I hadn't mentioned them yet because they weren't relevant. My parents were overweight and liked showing love via food, giving more food, buying treats, etc. My sister was also overweight, whereas I was not. I've always been kind of skinny because punishment often included no treats or snacks. Obviously, weight isn't what matters, personality is. But my sister, even then, was already rude and spoiled. Even her flirting attempts were bad because she never learned to work for anything since she could demand, and my parents would deliver. Added to that, the fact that she didn't look like some sexy model, even my self-conscious teen self didn't believe my boyfriend would try and cheat on me with her. Anyway, my parents prohibited me from dating such a horrible boy. I did try to keep going in secret, but it was hard, and the relationship ended. I did get another boyfriend, but again, my sister accused him of flirting with her when he refused her advances. Again, my parents believed her. I tried pointing out how this happened again, but they decided that I was incapable of making good choices and kept picking bad boyfriends. The relationship couldn't handle the Romeo-Juliet situation and fizzled out again. I would eventually get called a slut in high school as I was fine with making out with boys and such but refused to have relationships. Thankfully, it never got back to my sister or parents. My sister did bring one boyfriend home during all this time. He was paraded with pride, and my parents spent every second telling me how good he was and why I couldn't be like my sister and find myself someone like that. Until he stopped showing up and suddenly he was a conniving bastard that tricked my sister. Oh well, and the unequal treatment continued. At this time, she had more spending money, and her curfews were much better than mine. She was free to go anywhere at any time, while I couldn't. If I pointed it out, my parents would say it's because she's older, but when I reached that age, I still didn't have the same treatment she had, and when I pointed it out, they denied they ever said that or claimed it was because I couldn't be trusted like she was, using my sister's accusations against my boyfriends and friends as proof of my bad judgment. Time goes by, and it's time for my sister to graduate. She was accepted into a college, not a very well-regarded one, and she had no scholarship or anything. Again, because only her achievements were told to me, I don't know which colleges she even tried for, so I can't say how badly she was rejected. I do know her grades were bad in school though, because whenever she got a B, we would celebrate. I would usually get good grades, but my parents refused to celebrate, claiming since I always got those, what was there to celebrate? My parents naturally made a lot of fanfare and told her they'd pay for everything. I was relieved she'd be going away. Not that it made my life any easier. She'd always come home every other weekend and somehow stuff kept missing from my room, or some other issue she'd think of to make my life miserable. My curfews were still strict. Eventually, my mom came to talk to me about my impending graduation. I'm only a year younger than my sister. She told me that since they were paying for my sister's college, they had no money to pay for mine, so it would be better for me to start working immediately after graduation and wait until my sister finished university to see if they could afford something for me. Oh, and if I decided to stay at home, I'd have to pay for all my stuff, part of the bills and rent. I pointed out that I could get student loans. Mom said yes, except no, because they were so caring towards me and I had such bad judgment that they would decide if a college was worth my getting into debt or not. I'm not sure how they'd stop me from getting loans, but I didn't ask. Scholarships weren't mentioned. They had no idea what my grades were anymore and never believed in my capabilities anyway. I didn't bat an eyelid. I simply said okay. My mom clearly didn't expect that and kept prying. Maybe she hoped I'd throw a tantrum so they'd have an excuse to never pay for my college, but I said nothing except that I understood their position, thanked them for caring, and that was that. My dad later tried the same, but I also refused to be emotional. You see, after a whole lifetime of their terrible parenting, I never had any expectations towards my education. I knew they would find an excuse to not pay for mine and make my life miserable. I never believed they would eventually pay if I worked and waited for my sister to graduate. I had been preparing for college for a long time. I could barely go out, my friendships were slim, so I had a lot of time to study. And study I did because I saw college as my only chance to be free. Well, the time came, and I worked my ass off and got a scholarship, not to anywhere like Ivy League or anything like law or medical school, but it was a good enough course in a decent college with a full scholarship. Knowing my sister would hate it and try to stop me via my parents, I put my achievement on social media at the same time I told them, even forcing myself to thank them in the post. Now they couldn't forbid me from going as they'd have to explain to the family why not. Initially, they were even a little proud and boasted about it, and then I guess my sister got to them and they changed gears and even asked me if I was sure I wanted to go. They let slip that my sister wasn't doing well in college, and since she was smarter and had better judgment than me, I'd suffer worse. I obviously stuck to my guns. They weren't happy but couldn't do anything. College was my savior. I started being happy. I still contacted my parents and visited on holidays and such, but since they refused to pay for anything, I could excuse not going a lot due to money. During this time, I avoided introducing any man to them, and my sister stopped going to college. I know she didn't graduate because, again, they'd have made a fanfare about it. She moved back home, paying no bills or rent, but it's different, my parents said, and started working at the same company as my mom, obviously thanks to my mom pulling strings. This was all presented to me as a point of pride. Almost there, I promise. I met my husband around this time. You know those people who say, if I were in that situation, I'd have done something. My husband is the type who actually does. I'm the type who is meek and a doormat in any situation and then can't sleep at night wishing I had done something, had thought of something witty to say, etc. I'm the person who can't help but cry when I'm angry. My husband is the guy who claps back immediately. He loves drama and loves to resolve it. He's the guy that if he doesn't immediately reply to a slight, you better start worrying because he won't forgive and forget, he's just doing something worse for revenge. He's the one who wanted me to post here and wanted to post on a nuclear revenge board too but decided what we did wasn't nuclear. People were baffled that I got together with him, but just because I was incapable of acting like him due to my upbringing, it didn't mean I didn't like it. I love that my husband does what I can't, and he treats people well as long as they do the same to him. When we discussed marriage, we decided we didn't care much about the ceremony due to our budget as we'd rather spend on a dream trip to Europe for our honeymoon. As for where to do it, since his family was spread out and mine was still mostly concentrated in my hometown, we decided to do it there. We weren't living too far off either, so we could take some long trips during the weekends to manage stuff. Plus, there was some work flexibility, so we could stay in my hometown for a bit too if needed. We sent out the engagement announcement and the save the date for a few months later. At this point, my parents naturally demanded to meet my man. I wanted to grow a spine and refuse, but was having a hard time. The distance had made me think maybe my parents weren't so bad. Well, my husband looked like I had canceled Christmas when I told him I would at least ensure they were never alone with him. See, he had been getting ready for this. He even bought a high-quality recorder he could hide in a pocket to record it all. He was stoked thinking of all the ways he could refuse my sister's advances, insult her, and then spread the recording of her attempts to my family. So off he went alone and excited to meet them, and came back later euphoric. Babe, you won't believe the awful things they wanted. Babe, we can screw them over so bad. There's so many possibilities. I was confused and wanted to hear the recording, but he smartly told me it was better to listen to him first or else I'd misunderstand him. Well, he went there, and instead of flirting, my parents and my sister sat him down. After some grumbling about not being okay with him, my judgment, etc., they proclaimed they were willing to pay for my wedding on one condition. My sister would walk down the aisle. My parents insisted that my sister would walk down the aisle at my wedding first, in a wedding dress. Their excuse was that it wasn't okay for a younger sister to marry first, so it was only fair if my sister at least had the experience of it, at my venue, with pictures being taken, in the dress, and she'd even have a cake later. My husband will now type his part. Hey, vengeful husband here. Hell hath no fury like a pro-revenge instant karma nuclear revenge lurker when his beloved is scorned. That said, as much as my wife, she's my wife now, paints me as this quick-witted dude, I admit my neurons all but short-circuited when those folks legit suggested that crap like some sort of great gift. Even Troy would rather take in the horse a second time, me thinks. Alas, after my brain rebooted, I did have a whole list of insults ready to spew out, but something in my soul whispered in my ear like the devil, string these idiots along. So I said I needed to think, see how my wife, back then fiancé, would react, and then ran out of there before I could give away my nefarious plans. Back to me, the wife. So my husband sincerely recounted how my parents wanted even my wedding to be about my sister, with a grin on his face and the recording to prove it. I was shocked. The distance had softened how badly they treated me, and I thought even they wouldn't go so far. Thankfully, my husband insisting on the angle of revenge helped me not go to a bad headspace. We had a blast thinking up ways to screw them over, from ridiculously outlandish to what we thought was feasible. We then called his much more level-headed brother when we decided on a plan. It involved having 2 venue addresses, giving them the wrong one, etc. Well, the level-headed brother scolded us for it. While he acknowledged he would never be able to convince us to avoid retaliation, he at least showed us that something like that would be hard to pull off. Some of our other ideas were also at risk of getting us sued, so we eventually settled for the most benign plan: act like we agreed, but then hire security and don't let her in. Obviously, if that was all, it wouldn't be pro-revenge. The rest is mostly my husband's doing, but he wants me to do the honors. So here goes. Just important to mention, everything he did was previously discussed with me, and they were our mutual ideas. He went back to my parents, said he probed and thought I wouldn't be down with it. However, he didn't see the issue and, not wanting the family to fall apart, would be down to help them do it. He pointed out that I don't like conflict, so if I was surprised with it, I might not throw a tantrum in front of all the people. On the other hand, marriage is a big thing, so who knew if I'd lash out? Thus, he suggested a compromise. They'd help pay for stuff. This way, I would feel even more pressure to not say anything, as not only would we be public with our families there, but I'd be grateful for the help they gave. He said my parents looked shocked, and my grown sister literally started skipping with joy like a kid, so it was accepted. Importantly, my husband also claimed that due to some bad judgment and past boyfriends, these words were all my idea, and I'm so proud of using their words against them. I was distrustful and controlling and liked to check his phone and stuff to ensure he wasn't cheating on me. As such, it was imperative that nothing of this plan was ever put in writing. For any discussion pertaining to my sister walking down the aisle before me, he'd go over to their house to talk. And so began the months of deception where my parents and sister thought they were tricking me, while my husband and I were milking them. Rather than paying for the wedding, they lay low. Of course, my parents wanted input in everything, including some things that meant a lot to me, like the songs and color palette. My husband would convince them to let it go to keep me in line, but since we never really cared for the ceremony to begin with, everything else was fair game, or so they thought. Here's what we did. We'd go to check the drink and menu options and then accept the lowest or second lowest priced option. My husband would then secretly take my sister there to try it out and then sigh and say, "It's a pity we don't want to abuse my parents' goodwill, so we won't get the best options." Cue my sister demanding my parents pay for the best. My parents would then tell me not to worry and they'd pay for the most expensive option. The same was done with the photographer and flowers. My husband handed my sister a bouquet of the flowers we wanted and then sadly expressed how I wanted some other tasteless flowers. Cue my parents telling me they wanted us to go with said flowers and they'd pay for it. When it came to the wedding dress, we hit a minor snag. My parents wanted me to use a hideous dress. Okay, it wasn't outright hideous, but it wasn't my style and wouldn't look good on me. We had planned on saying yes and then simply not using it, but my mom sent me a message about it, so there'd be proof. I said okay. We had to go with me refusing to text and standing my ground. My husband went over there and said he'd see what he could do. My sister suggested ruining my desired dress so I'd be forced to wear the other one. He pretended to agree. During all this time, they kept communications outside any text. We made sure that happened by having me reply to my sister when she tried messaging my husband. This solidified the uncontrolling and neurotic claims my husband was making, so they believed it and never risked anything in writing. Some people might not like the thought of their partner going around and talking badly about them to family, but I'm such a doormat that the thought of being painted as this controlling and dangerous person is extremely funny to me, and I egged him on to do it. I guess I have a warped sense of humor. Oh, and my sister did try to flirt with him, but he acted conflicted to really sell that he was with them. My husband would pretend to tell them things without my knowledge, but he never told them we hired security. It was really funny. My husband and I, who had sincerely considered a courthouse wedding to focus costs on our honeymoon, ended up having this extravagant, expensive wedding and barely spent a dime. We called it back to pay for emotional damages from my parents. I think my husband, okay, he just confirmed I'm right, was enjoying the whole trick more than planning our wedding. I didn't think it was possible to witness a guy beaming at the thought of wasting his whole Saturday doing a car trip to discuss wedding details with his in-laws, but here we are. Soon the day came. The plan my parents, sister and husband had come up with was to wait until everyone was seated since the bride always comes out late. They'd have my sister arrive at that precise time to avoid me seeing her and trying to stop it, and she'd walk down the aisle. By the time I heard what happened, it would be too late to do anything. As for my dress, we saved some of the leftover fabric from my dress alterations. My husband took that to my parents' place, my sister still lives with them, and showed them as proof he'd ruined the dress, then said he had to go back to me as I was raging and he needed to calm me down. He told them he'd see them at the wedding. We made sure to keep our real security hidden initially. As the guests and my parents arrived, they only saw a woman with a list of names to check. Only after my parents had settled in did we bring out the actual security, a guy who looked like a bodyguard. We instructed him not to let my sister in and promised a generous tip if he kept our instructions confidential. Soon, the moment arrived. My parents got a text that my sister was less than 5 minutes away, so my dad signaled for the ceremony to start. My bridesmaids had been prepped to follow his lead, so they did without checking with me. After they all took their places, my dad stood at the entrance, waiting for me. During this, a friend not in the wedding party texted me to get ready, to avoid suspicion if my husband or bridesmaids started texting. This friend, my husband's ally, was as eager to stir drama as he was and didn't mind not being a bridesmaid. As soon as my dad took his position, the bridal song began. The doors opened and I entered. My dad was shocked to see me. He tried to look behind me but couldn't see the venue entrance from where we were, so he had no idea what had happened to my sister. Then his phone rang. I saw the caller ID, and it was her. He left me with a mumbled, "Something came up." Gasps and confusion filled the room. The friend on the plan loudly asked what happened. I lied and said tearfully, "He told me it wasn't supposed to be me there." My husband and I had agreed that if my dad abandoned me, I should say that to make him look as bad as possible. The tears weren't just acting. I was genuinely hurt and trying not to cry. The friend then loudly asked, "What did he mean by it shouldn't be you?" So that everyone could hear and spread it. Then she said, "I will go and check," and ran off. We planned this so she could create chaos with the security and prevent my dad from returning to stop the ceremony. Eventually, my mom also left. At this point, my husband's dad quickly ran over and took my arm. He'd been forewarned he might need to. His desperate run to me made me smile. I walked down the aisle to whispers as people discussed what had happened. Some left to check as well. When I reached my husband, all was well. He comforted me, joking that my sad face was so real I deserved an Oscar and reassured me he'd deal with my parents for what they did. We got married without any further issues. My parents didn't come back. I noticed a lot of people leaving and returning during the party, but no one dared tell me what was happening. Someone whispered in my husband's ear and he went out. He returned later with a thunderous expression but whispered to me that he needed to go hide before he broke character and started smiling. It worked. Here's the summary from friends, family, the security guy and my husband that I got afterwards. My sister arrived in a wedding dress. The security refused to let her in as we had agreed. He told her she must be at the wrong venue because there was already a bride. Yes, we tipped him very well as promised. My dad tried threatening him with the police, claiming he'd never heard of him, so he couldn't be working there. The security agreed to call the police since he was hired by us and was just doing his job. My dad realized it would be too late and tried to demand that he let my sister in. At this point, the friend came over, started shouting and insulting my sister, and asking what was going on, basically stalling. My mom soon arrived, followed by others. By then, the wedding plan was ruined. All my parents could do now was damage control, as everyone who learned about it was horrified they'd try to pull it off. People started screaming and berating them. The three naturally said it wasn't a secret and blamed my husband. When he was called over, my husband put on his best confused look and denied everything. To quote him, "Gaslight, gatekeeper, girl boss, LOL." He denied ever agreeing to such a ridiculous plan. When they insisted he demanded proof, and of course, they couldn't provide any. All the text exchanges they could show were about normal wedding decisions. My sister was scream-crying and apparently sat on the floor kicking her legs like a child. My dad looked like he wanted to hit my husband, but security and other people held him back. Naturally, they claimed they had no proof because my husband told them not to text. My husband laughed and said, "Wow, how convenient, huh?" Then he repeated, "Why would I ever agree to something so messed up?" He ripped into them about being terrible parents and said he wasn't going to let their stupid plans and lies ruin his wedding, then went back to me. No one believed them. The venue had cameras, but they wouldn't show me the recording as it was only for security purposes. However, some people filmed parts of it. Watching my parents and sister get torn apart by everyone who came out to see the drama was delightful. After years of being accused of things and not being believed, seeing them get a taste of their own medicine was one of the best wedding gifts. My mother was crying, my dad kept changing from purple to white, and my sister was still on the floor crying and screaming. They kept insisting that my husband was in on it, but people kept asking why he would agree, why there was no proof, and why they wanted my sister to do this at my wedding. They had no good answers. Eventually, they were told to leave and had no choice but to do so. My dad apparently had to drag my sister up as she refused to leave the ground. Again, people said nothing to me all night. I guess they wanted to spare me, and maybe it's because I was the bride and not just a guest for once, but it did feel like everyone was making an extra effort to be nice, positive, and excited about everything. My husband says all the expensive food and drinks they were eating certainly helped, LOL. We had a blast. My husband kept up the forced angry face for only a short while before breaking out in smiles again. After that, we went to the hotel to catch some sleep before heading off on our honeymoon. Speaking of which, my parents did try to pay for our plane tickets, but we thought that was risky as they could try to cancel them or something, so we refused. Since then the three of them have tried to contact me. I've refused calls because my husband insisted on keeping a paper trail, a smart move because my sister eventually messaged me. I won't repeat what she said as it was very unhinged and didn't make much sense, but the important part was that she blamed me for her humiliation. Called my husband a two-faced snake who fooled them for months, he wants to print and hang that on our wall, LOL, and hoped, but was also certain, that I'd get cheated on by him. She even suggested he was cheating on me with her. My husband took my phone, screenshot the call logs, my sister's messages and some messages from my parents demanding I pick up the phone, and sent it all to our family group chat. He also sent screenshots of messages to him where they called him names and threatened him, but he kept up the "you're delusional, I never agreed to anything" shtick and even threatened to sue them for defamation and harassment. He wrote a message in the group chat begging my family for help as I was now being harassed by them constantly. He pleaded with them to stop my parents and sister from ruining our honeymoon after they failed to ruin our wedding. He ended with a request that they not share our locations to prevent my parents from sending my sister over and claiming he had somehow agreed to pretend to sleep with her in our honeymoon suite, LOL. My family assured him they'd handle it, and since then, we've had peace. My husband is a bit disappointed that my sister didn't disobey so he could call her out again while tearing her a new one. We'll see if the peace lasts. All in all, while I would have preferred a normal, loving family at my wedding, at least for once in my life they not only failed to ruin something meaningful to me, but I got back at them. Extra info: do I know why they treat me like this? I've been asked this question a lot, so I assume you all will wonder the same. I've pondered this all my life and still don't know. I tried asking when I was young, but they denied any difference and scolded me for being spoiled, so I stopped trying. I've considered many possibilities, but based on my observations I think it's this. I was unplanned. They took a while to have my sister, so she was not only wanted but also like a miracle child after so long. However, given our small age difference, I think they didn't expect to have another child so soon or easily and didn't use adequate protection after my sister's birth. Maybe they didn't realize my mom was pregnant until it was too late, So they were saddled with an unplanned baby while still dealing with a newborn. They're not well off, so having the extra expense likely didn't help, and they resented me. But that's just my conjecture. Regardless, I've accepted that the reason won't truly matter. What they did to me was unwarranted, no matter what. Did they really think this would work? My husband and I have a theory that they never intended to do this at all. We think my sister threw a tantrum over me getting married first when she barely gets dates, and they made my husband that outlandish proposition. They didn't want to pay for my wedding and didn't think we'd accept or that it would even look good for them to do it. By suggesting it and being refused, they could look like the good guys to my sister while having an excuse not to give me a dime. But then my husband accepted it, and they couldn't backtrack without risking my sister turning on them. My wife did not have *X with me for years when I was depressed. Am I the asshole for considering leaving her now that I'm back to normal? Throwaway account as my wife follows my main account. My wife, 34F, and I, 34M, have been married for 9 years, together for 14, and we have 2 children. Long story short, prior to this year, I was depressed. This period lasted for almost 3 years and was a culmination of various things: my best friend dying, work stress, life in general. During this time period I did not have sex with my wife even once. My libido had drastically decreased, but whenever I did initiate, my wife said she wasn't in the mood and wasn't feeling attracted to me. That really hurt me, and was also probably another of the causes of my depression. However, starting this year, I made a resolution to improve my life outlook whatever necessary, and at least fake it till I make it. I started going out more, going back to the gym again. I was a gym addict before I was depressed, and had a more positive outlook on life. It's been almost 9 months now, and I can say I'm the fittest I've ever been, because I really slog it out at the gym and take out all my frustrations there. I am also generally much happier, and have a very active life. My sex life has also drastically improved, and we have sex frequently. However, that is the only thing that really bothers me. While the sex is great, I don't feel any emotion or love for my wife. I still feel very hurt that my wife rejected me for years and told me many times she was not attracted to me. Would I be the asshole for considering leaving her now that I have my life in order? I don't think my wife stuck with me at my lowest, and that has severely impacted my love for her. My husband made me stop believing in soulmates. Now, after 15 years, he's finally opened up and strengthened our love even more. My husband made me believe soulmates aren't real. I am using a different account so that my husband doesn't know. Before meeting my current husband, I was married to my ex-husband Dave. Dave and I met when we were 5 years old. He moved into our neighborhood when he was 5. He was this cute boy next door. We became inseparable. Even our parents joked that when we would be adults we would be married. Ever since I knew the concept of marriage, I was determined that I would marry Dave. We were like soulmates. We had the same interests, the same hobbies, the similar thoughts. He was my first everything. My first kiss, my first boyfriend. The guy I lost my virginity to. Among our friends we were the perfect couple. After graduating high school, we immediately got married. I got into a good school, but I decided to study with Dave. We got married right after we finished high school. Our parents helped us find an apartment closer to our school. We worked hard. We would often talk about having kids. On our 6th anniversary we decided that we would try for a baby next year. I still remember the day when we were teenagers and cuddling. We already decided what our babies' names would be. During our 7th year of marriage, my mom got sick, so I had to stay with her for a while. I was planning to do something special for our 7th year anniversary. So I left early to surprise him. I went to my bedroom and there I saw my husband fucking another girl in our marital bed. I can never get that image out of my head. My husband saw me and his face turned pale. I don't know what happened but I threw up right in the spot. My husband was giving me the usual "it's not what it looks like. I am sorry. It was a mistake." I locked myself in the bathroom. I somehow mustered my strength and called my friend to pick me up and just don't listen to Dave. When my friend arrived she charged at Dave. She grabbed some of my things and we left. I was in a catatonic stage at that point. Eventually my parents knew. They supported whatever decision I would make. Dave's parents however wanted us to be together. There was a huge fight but eventually we settled for divorce. My whole fairy tale fantasy just shattered. I was spiraling into depression. My parents booked me for therapy. For 2 years I was like a living corpse. After that my friend pushed me to go on a date. I did but no one even came close to Dave. I was searching for Dave in every guy. But they all failed to live up to the expectation. That is when I met my now husband Jay. Jay was the opposite of Dave. Dave was funny, He would be the life of the party. I remember one time he made me laugh so hard that I fell from my chair. But Jay was not funny like Dave. He would use humor only as clapbacks and if he wants to insult someone. He was also very stoic and closed off. Pretty boring to my taste. On our first date, I asked him some questions like, what is your favorite movie? He told me he doesn't watch movies. He likes reading? He didn't even ask me a thing. Except for my educational background. He talked mostly about my field of work. But he was not interested in me. We ate dinner in silence. I was 100% sure he would not call me. But 2 days later he did. He asked me out on a second date. I was skeptical of whether or not I should go. But my friend insisted. I gave it another try. Second date went slightly better than the first. He talked a bit more. Asked a few questions. We were taking it slow. He was opening up until the 6th date when he finally hooked up. TMI, it was amazing. I am someone who has a snack after having sex. I was craving for some, so I asked him if I could grab something from his pantry. Even a bread and cheese sandwich will do. He told me to stay there and he went out. I was kinda confused. He came back after 20 minutes with takeout food. It was something I really liked, orange chicken. I asked how he knew. He told me, you told me on our previous date. I melted right there. Dave and I have been together for most of my life, but he never made the effort of going out and get me something. That's when I knew even if he was not my soulmate, I was madly in love with him. We dated for 3 years and got married. I came to know about Jay's family too. His mom and dad were drug addicts who died of overdose. He was homeless for a while but worked his way up. Throughout our marriage I was very, very happy. He was different from Dave because whenever he would see me doing chores he would ask, need help. He helped me through my trauma from Dave by arranging a therapist that specializes in infidelity. He may not be a person of words but his actions tell me that he loves me. When I was pregnant with our daughter, I would wake him up in the middle of the night to either get me food or rub my feet. He would say, yes ma'am, and get to work. I love him. Even after 15 years of marriage my love has not stopped. He is still the stoic man I fell in love with. After meeting him I stopped believing in the concept of a soulmate. He was not mine but we somehow made it work. I love you, Jay. Thanks for being there in my life. And anyone who is wondering what happened to Dave, he is getting his 3rd divorce. His mom blames me for his downfall but she refuses to see that her son cheated on his every marriage. Edit, I am sorry if there was any typing mistake. I am typing on my phone and the autocorrect is acting nuts. I tried to turn it off but it didn't work. Relevant comments. Commenter. Who knows, maybe Jay is your soulmate. He seems to be more ideally suited to you from the beginning than Dave ever was. OOP, from the outside we do not look like soulmates. Dave and I were the typical girl next door and boy next door kind of people. Jay was more closed off. Initially when I was dating him he was really rude in my opinion. He also has a bad temper towards people who screw up. But other than that he is good and kind. He helps those who genuinely need help. Commenter. After reading this, all I can say is fuck Dave, metaphorically, and fuck Jay, literally, in several positions, then have a nice dessert. I'm glad to hear you are happy. Hope you, Jay, and your kids, have many, many more happy years ahead of you. OOP, fuck Jay. Literally, in several positions, then have a nice dessert. I have been doing that for 18 years lol. And he still gets me snack. Commenter. His mom blames me for his downfall. Because it can't be the fault of her fucking child being an immoral, faulty human being, could it? I am poly. I have a different attitude to sex around a relationship, but promises are promises regardless. Commitment is commitment no matter what flavor, and Dave is clearly emotionally incomplete. I never believed in soulmates, from childhood. But you know when it works, when it's right, you just had to have a trial marriage to refine your definition. OOP. According to his mom, he was devastated when I wanted divorce. She tried to convince me to stay with him even after knowing he cheated. She was angry at me and my parents when I said no. She blames me because she thinks that if I had stayed her son would not have become a serial cheater because I could fix him. His other marriage failed because he was a mess because of me. Not because he was fucking other people on the side. Commenter. Dave was never your soulmate. Jay was. Just took time to find him. OOP. When I asked Jay about if he believes in soulmates he told me, I don't believe that crap. It's just like a horoscope. People believe in it because it makes them feel better. A lot of potential good relationships get broken because of this crap. I was kinda devastated that he doesn't believe in soulmates. Can you believe in these 18 years, we have only said I love you only 5 times as far as I can count? I want to say it more. I said I love you to my husband after 5 years. My husband, 47M, and I, 46F, have been together for 18 years and married for 15. My husband is not the type who always shows his feelings. He is very stoic, smiles on very few occasions, and maintains a routine. Some even say that he is a robot. But I don't think so. I am someone who is very outgoing and completely the opposite of him. Before I was married to him, I was married to someone else who cheated on me. I used to say I love you a lot in my first marriage. But after my divorce, I had some sort of aversion to those words. Over the last 18 years, we have said I love you only 5 times. First time was when we were dating, second was on our wedding day, third and fourth when our daughter and son were born, and the fifth was 5 years ago on Christmas when we were really tipsy because of the drinks. I wrote a post about how I met him and how we got together, but it made me realize that we haven't said I love you to each other for a long time. But it didn't bother me. Even if he never said it, he always shows that he loves me in his actions. He does chores for me, he would always give me a foot massage, make me my favorite dish, even kiss me out of the blue. I do not have any complaints. He is the best husband anyone could ever ask for. But this was something that has been in the back of my mind for a while. We cuddle, we hang out, we make love, but still no I love yous. I would love to hear it and say it more often, but somehow it just makes me nervous. I decided to buckle up and just say it. It's just 3 words. So yesterday when he was reading a book on the couch, I stood in front of him and said, I love you. He looked at me and was confused. I repeated it. For the first time, I could see him get flustered. He told me okay. I was a little disappointed by his response. I thought he just didn't love me anymore. Later that night when I was lying down, he came to our bedroom and told me that he was sorry for his response. That it caught him off guard. He told me that he loves me a lot. And not even a day goes by that he doesn't feel lucky to have me in his life. I was tearing up. That was better than my confession. I asked him why we don't say that often. He told me that he doesn't say it because throughout his entire life no one has said it to him except for me. His parents were drug addicts who cared less for him. He had to start working at 14. He grew up in hardships, so saying I love you is weird for him. But also he feels like we didn't have to tell each other when we express it with our actions way more. I told him I want to say it more now and want him to say it back if that's okay with him. I saw him smile for a while and he said it is fine as long as I want it. I don't think we need to say it when we know we love each other a lot. We will probably stop saying it after a few days and go back to our mundane events LOL. A lot of you people have been asking me and personally messaging me about Jay's upbringing and how he managed to survive. Well, I am not sure if I'm the right person to talk about his personal life. I mean, I heard some parts which really made me cry. Therefore, I will try to summarize it. So my husband Jay is an only child. His mom and dad were from a poor family. They were drug addicts. His household was a mess. He remembers his father pushing him down the stairs when he was like 8. Jay mostly grew up with his grandfather, his mom's dad. As far as I know, his mom was not allowed to come to his grandfather's house. Jay mostly spent his weekdays at his house. His mom and dad didn't care. They were always high and had odd visitors. His grandfather taught him a lot of things. Like handling tools, woodwork, electric repair stuff. Ever since he was little, with some advice from his grandfather, he learned that his parents are very useless. He has to survive on his own. All they know is how to do drugs and invite people to have group sex. He started doing odd jobs like dog sitting, car and window washing, gardening. He also tutored from time to time. Shortly after, his parents died of overdose. He became a permanent resident of his grandfather's house. He worked so that he could afford to go to college. His grandfather had little money for him. But it wasn't enough. He thought about joining the army at 18, but he failed the physical test. When he was 17, his grandfather died of a heart attack. His grandfather lived in a rented house, so Jay couldn't live there anymore. He was forced to live in a homeless shelter throughout his high school. He even got bullied and got in trouble for standing up for his bullies. But since he was a good student, he didn't face serious repercussions. He left the homeless shelter when a pastor from their local church took him in. He knew Jay because he worked in the church for a while. The pastor was a nice guy. He funded his living and also helped him get a scholarship to a good university. Jay studied finance and business. His entire childhood, he lived in poverty. So he was obsessed with learning how to make money. He made some connections which landed him a good part-time job during his final year. I met Jay through my friend. She worked in the same company as him. He worked as an investment banker at the time. And the rest you all know. This is pretty much it. I understand why he is so stoic and doesn't show his emotions. I once asked out of curiosity that he saw the harsh reality of life but still how he manages to stay good. He once told me about this couple whose children he used to tutor. They were a really happy family in his eyes. The husband loved his wife. He mentioned that the husband would always have a hand on his wife's body as a form of affection. Their children were also well behaved and had a good childhood. From that moment he knew he wanted a family like that. Because he never had a complete family. But he was sure that somebody would not be able to love him because he doesn't know how to show love. Throughout his entire childhood he has only seen his parents fight and cheat on each other in front of each other. That really destroyed his perception of love. If it wasn't for that couple, he probably wouldn't believe that there are people in this world who can love each other for life. It is a little wrong of me to say he displays no emotions. He does, but on rare occasions. I remember the day our daughter was born. Jay held her and cried loudly. He kept repeating, "I will protect you. I will never leave you." He did say "I love you" to both me and her. Same thing happened when our son was born. I mean, it gave me an idea to just pop out babies so that I can see his emotional face, haha. But anyways, I know he does love me and our little family. He always holds me tight whenever we are cuddling. He is really good with my parents. My parents also adore him. Sometimes, it just makes me cry knowing that he has been through a lot and I have lived such a sheltered life. Sometimes, I feel like I don't deserve him because he is very kind and a good person. Also, yeah, we do say "I love you" a lot more now. Final update. I just wanted to give big thanks to everyone who has been kind and supportive. I cannot imagine that so many people will come through because of my post. A lot of you suggested therapy. I did in the past, but my husband brushed it off by saying his past rarely bothers him. Thanks to people on Reddit, I suggested to him some articles on PTSD and childhood trauma. He studied for a bit and found a therapist for him to help him with his trauma. He only had 2 sessions till now. Few days ago he came home from work and I went to greet him like usual. He pulled in for a big hug and started sobbing. I told him it's okay. We went to our bedroom where we sat down and talked. He told me that he was sorry for being so ice cold all these years. He opened up more and said he was afraid to confront his demons, so he just kept them back in his head. He had trouble expressing how he felt. He felt guilty that he didn't say he loves more often. I am just paraphrasing what he told me. I love you with all my heart. I know I don't say it, but I feel it every day and every moment. I am sorry for taking away all those years from you, for not expressing my love for you. Words cannot express what you actually mean to me. You gave me my kids, made my house a home. I never had that growing up. I always wanted that and you made it happen. I am sorry that I was so cold and never said I love you more. Because I do. I love you a lot. I want to make it up to you. I don't want to waste another second of my life burying those emotions anymore. It feels good to see him vulnerable for the first time in his life. I cried with him that night. We talked a lot about our marriage and the times we spent together. It was a real bonding experience. From that day on he has been really attentive towards me. He would always come home as early as possible to simply have more time with me. We cuddle a lot and also make love. Except this time it feels new and different. Like a newfound love. He has been saying "I love you" to my kids. My son is confused and my daughter just said, "Dad, you're weird." He is thinking about planning a trip for just the 2 of us because it has been really long since we had gone on a trip alone. So thanks to Reddit. You gave me a new version of my husband and probably strengthened my marriage with him. Not that there were problems, but I hope my husband would not be so haunted by his demons now. Stepdad's birthday gift turned nightmare, hidden camera found in clock. The shocking truth about who really planted it. For my 18th birthday, my stepdad gifted me a clock. When I discovered a hidden camera inside, I fled, suspecting him, but later found out the new assistant was responsible for spying on me. I'm 18 and live with my mom and stepdad Joshua. My mom married Josh 6 months ago after a rough divorce with my dad, who had an affair. It was a messy situation, and now neither my mom nor I have any contact with him. Josh has been a family friend for as long as I can remember. I never suspected he had feelings for my mom, and I don't think anything happened between them before the divorce. Growing up, I called him Uncle Josh and spent time at his dental practice, so it was a bit of an adjustment seeing him as a father figure. But I always liked him. And he makes my mom happy, so I went with it. Yesterday was my birthday, and I usually don't make a big deal out of it. I went to school, then hung out with friends. It was a nice day. When I got home, I was surprised to find out my mom and Josh had planned a surprise party for me. This was quite a shock because my mom is usually terrible at keeping secrets. I walked in to find my mom, Josh, Aunt Kathy, and my little cousins ready to surprise me. It was actually quite nice. We celebrated with cake and my favorite foods, and everyone seemed happy. Then came the time for presents, which is where things took a turn. I opened gifts from my cousins and Aunt Kathy first. Then my mom and Josh gave me concert tickets to one of my favorite bands. I was thrilled because I had been saving up for ages to buy a ticket with my part-time diner job. It felt like the best birthday gift ever. After my aunt and cousins left, I went to my room to tell my best friend about the tickets. I was in bed chatting with her when Josh knocked on my door, saying he had one more present for me. I was already so happy with the tickets that I couldn't imagine anything better. Josh brought out a huge box and I tore into the wrapping. Inside was a pink wall clock with little strawberry decals. It was cute but seemed underwhelming compared to the concert tickets. Nevertheless, I was grateful and placed it on my study table. Josh asked if I liked it and I said yes. He was really happy and mentioned that the concert tickets were my mom's idea, but he wanted to get me something special on his own. My room is decorated in pink with lots of strawberry-themed items, so the clock fit perfectly. I appreciated the thought and thanked him again for being so considerate. He wished me a happy birthday once more and left. Feeling sleepy, I told Amy I was going to bed and would talk to her the next day. She had been on the call and heard Josh come in, asking what he got me. When I told her it was a clock, she insisted I show it to her. I promised to send a picture the next morning, but she was persistent, so I agreed to take a picture and send it right then, even though I didn't want to get out of bed. So she would have to settle for a terrible dark picture with my flash on. My study table is right beside my bed, so when I'm lying down, I can just barely reach it. Feeling extremely lazy, I decided to stretch out and snap the picture from bed. That's when I noticed something really odd. My room was pitch dark. I don't have any night lights or fairy lights because I need complete darkness to sleep. I grabbed my phone, opened the camera, turned on the flash, and aimed it at the clock. That's when I saw it. A small bluish light on the clock. The time flashed in a soft pink, but there was a noticeable blue light. I found it strange but didn't think much of it. I took the picture, sent it to Amy and tried to sleep. I was almost asleep when I remembered something from a movie or TV show and instantly sat up. I glanced at the clock again, did a quick search on Google, and attempted to take another picture, this time with my front camera. Guess what? The same blue light confirmed it. There was a hidden camera in that clock. In case you didn't know, you can detect hidden cameras using the front cameras on most phones, and sometimes even the back camera. I'm not sure exactly where I learned this, but I'm a huge fan of crime documentaries, so maybe I picked it up from a show or something. I was convinced there was a camera in that clock, and it was recording me. I felt a knot in my stomach. I didn't know what was going on. Why would Josh give me something like that? Someone might have been watching me right then and there. That thought snapped me out of my shock. I got up, threw the clock in the trash, and when I returned to bed I was trembling and confused. I didn't understand what was happening. It all seemed surreal. I didn't know what to do, so I called Amy and woke her up. I explained what happened and she was just as freaked out as I was. We stayed on the call for a while and she suggested I call the cops because clearly, Josh was some sort of creep, and who knows where else he might have hidden cameras. The thought made my stomach churn. I considered going straight to my mom and Josh to tell them what happened, but I was so confused and scared at that moment it almost felt like a nightmare. Amy and I ventured online to locate a particular clock on a dubious website. After some thorough searching, we finally found it. The site was filled with eerie surveillance gadgets and similar items. The most unsettling part was spotting stuffed animals there, which made me even more uneasy since I own many stuffed animals, some gifted by my mom and Josh over the years. It made me wonder if any of them could have hidden cameras. I began feeling like everything in my room was watching me. It was one of the most distressing experiences I've had. Unsure of what else to do, I gathered all the stuffed animals that I hadn't bought myself, along with the clock, stuffed them into a trash bag and got rid of them. Feeling physically ill, I decided to just sleep it off and handle it in the morning. I took some melatonin, played some white noise, and tried to sleep. I don't remember when I fell asleep, but I know it wasn't much. My mom woke me up, shouting my name. Disoriented, it took me a moment to understand that she was yelling about the wall clock. She said Josh found it while taking out the trash that morning and was deeply hurt by my actions. I took a deep breath and told her to give me a moment so I could explain everything, confident that she would understand why I was relieved to have thrown it away. She called me an ungrateful brat, saying I wasn't worth the effort they put into making my birthday special, and demanded that I apologize to Joshua immediately. Before I get into what happened next, Keep in mind it was very early in the morning, just before 7 a.m. I had a rough night and barely slept. My mom's agitation put me in a bad mood too. So when she told me to apologize, I snapped back that Josh was lucky I wasn't reporting him to the police for being a massive creep. My mom lost it and slapped me. I was shocked. In 18 years, she had never raised a hand to me, and now she did it over a man. I was offended and deeply hurt. The full reality of the situation hit me and I started to cry. My mom thought I was crying because of the slap, but it was more than that. I was overwhelmed and needed her support, but she only made things worse. She saw me crying and said there was no point in it, that I should have thought before acting like a brat and throwing away a thoughtful gift. That was the last straw. I got really angry and yelled that she should think twice before defending her husband. She got even angrier and warned me to be careful about what I said next. I had enough. I got out of bed, grabbed my phone and car keys, and asked her if she knew where Josh got the clock from. She thought I was implying it was a cheap gift, which wasn't the point at all. As she started to say something else, I told her I'd had enough and didn't want to hear it. I pushed past her, ran to my car and drove away. She followed me to the driveway and tried to stop me, but I was quick enough to get away. I drove to a nearby diner and sat there for a while, trying to figure out my next move. Knowing I couldn't go home, I called Amy, and she told me to come over to her place. That's where I've been since the afternoon. Amy and I decided to confront my mom and tell her the truth, so we sent her screenshots of the creepy site where the clock was listed. I sent them to her and waited. About an hour later, I started getting calls and texts from both her and Josh. I didn't want to talk to either of them, so I ignored the calls, but the texts were all apologies. They both said they were ashamed of how they acted and should have given me a chance to talk instead of lashing out. They offered to explain if I gave them a chance, but I honestly didn't care. I couldn't see how this could be explained or made okay, and I definitely didn't want to go back home. I texted my mom, telling her to stop trying to reach me because I wasn't interested in hearing her out. She replied with a long message saying that Josh was innocent and would never do anything like that. Apparently, the wall clock was bought by his assistant Peter. Josh did want to get me something for my birthday without mom's help but didn't care enough to pick something out himself, so he asked Peter. Peter is a new guy working for Josh for the last few months. Josh hired him fresh out of college, so he's not much older than me. Since Josh's practice is nearby, he sometimes sends Peter to run errands like getting his lunch, and he has even come to dinner, so I've met him a few times. He always seemed kind of creepy to me, so it wasn't a big surprise that he would try something like this. He never even tried to talk to me directly, and I had no reason to believe he was capable of doing something like that. My mom's text said they wanted to call the cops on Peter but wouldn't do it without my permission. She also said she would leave Josh because he put me in this spot with his carelessness. That shocked me because I know my mom really loves Josh, so it must have been hard for her to say that. This finally made me call her. My mom sounded devastated. She had no idea about the camera and felt incredibly guilty for not believing me earlier. She kept sobbing and apologized a million times, saying she was sorry for everything, especially for slapping me and not listening when I needed her most. She said she just wanted me to come back home so she could apologize in person and make things right between us. I told her I still wasn't ready to see her but asked if she was sure it was Peter and not Josh who bought the clock. She said she trusts Josh. I told her I was still not comfortable living in the same house as him and she said I was more important to her, and if I wanted to, she would get separated from Josh. I told her I needed time to think. Also, I got a million missed calls from Josh, but I didn't pick up any of them. He texted me many times, saying he can prove that Peter bought the clock and that he had no idea it had a camera. He also said my mom wasn't speaking to him and begged me to hear him out. He said he loved my mom and me as a daughter and would never do anything to hurt us. So that's what my day has been like. Amy has been my rock and said I can stay with her as long as I need. It's just her and her grandma at their house, and I know her grandma well, so I'm sure she won't mind me staying until I figure out my next move. My mom has even tried to reach Amy, but she didn't pick up. It's not hard to figure out where I would go in a situation like this, but I hope she doesn't actually show up at her door. I feel really guilty and conflicted. I think maybe I should hear him out and see if he actually has proof, but at the same time, I feel scared and unsafe at the thought of seeing him. I don't want to destroy my mom's marriage over a misunderstanding, but I'm wondering if I'm doing something wrong here. Amy says I should do what feels right to me, but I'm not sure at all. Update 1. I did not expect to become Reddit famous overnight. The response to my post has been overwhelming, with so many questions and comments that I haven't even had a chance to read through them all. But I have some major updates to share first. The morning after my post, my mom and Josh showed up at Amy's place. I wasn't surprised. I told my mom I didn't want to see Josh and that they should leave, but she begged me to hear her out. She was very emotional, clearly having been crying, and even Josh looked rough. Feeling bad for them, I decided to hear them out once. First, let me clarify that Josh was not lying about Peter picking out the gift. He showed me text between them. Although there was no direct text about finding a gift, there were messages from Peter saying he found the perfect item and a picture of the clock. It looked like an ordinary clock. Just like when I first got it. Josh had told him to order it and send the invoice to the office. The conversation was basic and nothing seemed suspicious. Reflecting on my interactions with Peter, nothing major stood out. He had just been a little creepy, like catching him looking at me, but I never thought much of it. I told Mom and Josh about this, and they were furious. Josh kept apologizing, saying he failed me and put me in danger and that he would never forgive himself. By then, I knew it wasn't his fault and I wasn't angry at him anymore. I agreed to go back home with them. I can't believe I almost ruined their marriage over this. It's gross to think that some random creep was trying to spy on me, and the thought of him seeing me gives me chills. This whole situation is a nightmare. We decided to go to the police. We have enough proof to ensure Josh isn't caught up in the investigation, and he's willing to do anything to get me justice. We're going to the police tomorrow morning. The clock is still in the trash because we don't want to alert Peter if he's still watching. I'm nervous, but at least I have support. I hope they catch him and teach him a lesson. I'll try to post an update. Some of you suggested not trusting Josh, thinking he might be in on it with Peter and now trying to shift the blame. I understand your concerns, but I trust him. Peter has been a creep for as long as I've known him. Even if Josh were capable of such a thing, why would he involve Peter, someone he's only worked with for a few months? I checked the texts on Josh's phone and the timing between messages. It didn't look like any were deleted, and Josh showed me the transfer of money to Peter's account for the clock. He had no way of knowing where the clock was bought from. All of this makes me feel like I can trust Josh. I'd rather give him the benefit of the doubt over Peter. Sure, Josh should have been more careful and picked out the gift himself, but that doesn't make him a criminal. Peter wouldn't take the fall for Josh because there's enough proof to get him in trouble. If Josh was involved, the investigation will reveal the truth. Regarding how Peter knew I would like that kind of clock, Josh mentioned that he told Peter to look for something pink and preferably with strawberries. It's not a hard guess for anyone who knows me. I love pink and have a lot of strawberry-themed things. It's just part of my personality. But instead of focusing on that, we should be more concerned that these products even exist. Many of you have asked me to name the site where the clock was bought, but I don't want to cause trouble. However, you can easily find it if you search for hidden cam clocks online. Amy and I found it pretty quickly that night. Update 2. We called the cops on Peter and he got arrested. Thank you to everyone who offered advice and support on my previous post. After reading your comments and discussing it with my mom and Josh, I realized I couldn't just let this go. I felt shaken and scared, but I knew I needed to act to protect myself and possibly others. I talked with Amy and realized he might be doing this to other girls. Maybe even minors, which made me more determined to stop him. After having breakfast and gathering my thoughts, I decided to call the police. My mom and Josh stayed with me for emotional support. I explained everything to the dispatcher, the hidden camera, the suspicious clock, and my confrontation with my mom. They took it seriously and sent 2 officers to our house to take my statement. The officer was very understanding and professional. I was nervous about how it would go, but the officer just asked me to describe the clock in detail and any other suspicious items. He asked about my interactions with Peter, and I told him everything I could remember, though there wasn't much. I also mentioned the website where Amy and I found similar spy devices. The officer assured me they would investigate thoroughly. We shared the text exchanges between Josh and Peter, showing that Josh asked Peter to pick out the gift. The officer said they needed Josh to go with them for questioning. Josh agreed immediately, reassuring us that there was no need to worry and that he would be back soon. After taking my statement, the officer asked if I felt safe staying at home and if I had any friends or family I could stay with. I told him I trusted my mom and Josh and felt all right. He told me to contact them if I felt unsafe. They also needed to search our house for other possible hidden cameras or suspicious items. The police conducted a thorough search, particularly in my room, but found nothing besides the clock and some stuffed animals I had thrown away. Peter claimed that none of the other items were bought by him, and my mom confirmed that most were bought by her. The police went through them but found nothing suspicious. They didn't find anything else in the house, which visibly relieved my mom when the police confirmed there were no other objects of concern. Josh left with the cops and came back after a few hours. When I asked what happened, he said it was all routine. They asked if he wanted a lawyer, which he declined, and mentioned he might be called in again. The cops also wanted my mom to come in for standard questioning the next day and needed me to come in too for paperwork and other details. Peter was arrested at his home and is now under investigation for invasion of privacy and related crimes. I don't know much about the ongoing investigation, but I hope he confesses or they gather enough evidence to convict him and prove Josh wasn't involved. It has been an exhausting day, and I just want all of this to be over soon. My mom and Josh have been very supportive, giving me space to process everything. We've also hired a lawyer, whom I'll meet tomorrow. I'll try to provide an update, but it might take a while as I need time to process everything and wait for more definite developments. Update 3, it has been 4 months since my last update. I've been really busy, so I apologize for the delay. First, Peter was found guilty, and we pressed charges against him. He didn't put up a fight and admitted to buying the camera clock without Josh's knowledge to spy on me. The only silver lining is that we found no evidence of him doing anything similar in the past. Since I was a minor when Peter first started working for Josh, he didn't bother to delete his search history. The police found the site with surveillance devices on his computer. More disturbingly, they also discovered that he followed me on almost all my social media using fake IDs. I had no idea about this, and it really creeped me out. He admitted that he had a crush on me when he first saw me, which is extremely creepy because he was an adult, and I was only 17 at the time. The police didn't find any evidence of him doing anything except following me on social media while I was still a minor. He said he knew he couldn't approach me directly, so when Josh asked him to pick out a present, he came up with this disgusting plan. I don't even want to think about what would have happened if I had not noticed the camera that night. Since he had no prior convictions or criminal charges against him, this was considered a misdemeanor rather than a felony. Despite our efforts to charge him with a felony, he only spent a few days in jail before being bailed out. I am quite disappointed with how things turned out, but at least his actions are permanently on his record. That's all I can tell myself. Over the past few months I've been focusing on school and getting into college. I am also going to therapy to deal with the trauma of what happened. I am grateful to have my mom, Amy, and Josh supporting me through all of this. My boyfriend thinks I should put up with his son's mistreatment of me because he's autistic. Am I the asshole for being ready to end the relationship? Update. I took my baby and left last night. I'm hiring a lawyer to seek sole custody. Thank you for all the advice and kind words. His son is 18 but functions at a 12-13-year-old level. He says he's high functioning but I don't think he is. My boyfriend's parents raised his son and were and still are very permissive with him. He sleeps all day and gets taken out for dinner literally every day, has zero responsibilities and refuses to get a job. I know there's places that hire disabled people but he's flat out said he's not going to work. He treats his grandmother like shit and calls her horrible names such as bitch and whore. He still gets whatever he wants just handed to him. I can't stand him. My boyfriend and I have a 5-month-old son together, and when he was a newborn, my PPD was so bad I was hospitalized for it. His son thinks I abandoned my son because I didn't want to take care of him and there's no convincing him otherwise. This has resulted in him screaming at me that he hates me and wants me to leave. This isn't the first time this has happened either. I've asked my boyfriend to talk to him and he says he didn't raise him and nothing would change even if he did. Now he's saying that if I can't accept his son then we can't be together. It's not about me not accepting him. I've known since the beginning of our relationship, almost 3 years, that his son is autistic and I loved him and felt maternal towards him. His own mother basically abandoned him, so I felt bad for him, but now I don't exactly like him since he's spoiled and entitled. I accept him but I didn't sign up to be mistreated and disrespected and be told to deal with it or leave. My boyfriend takes it like I can't accept his kids, but that's not it. Honestly, I'm ready to end things. The rest of his family sweeps it under the rug too. They said they're trying to teach him about PPD but it's not working so far. I know he's jealous because he sees his dad engage with our son like he didn't with him, but I'm not gonna put up with him treating me like shit because he's projecting his anger at his mom and dad onto me. I feel that my boyfriend doesn't love or respect me by telling me to deal with it. I worry that he's going to do this to someone in public and they'll hurt him. I worry that he's going to physically attack me one day, and I'm tired of not being able to take care of my son without him staring me down, and he brings my son to everyone but me. I'm tired of everyone excusing it as his autism. Autistic people know better than to talk to people that way. I think it's because he's never been told a day in his life. I love my boyfriend but I'm not prepared to deal with being verbally abused every day. His son is on meds but they need to be adjusted. He's about to start therapy again too. Should I leave? TLDR, boyfriend and his family excuse his son's mistreatment of me as it is just his autism. Boyfriend says deal with it and accept his kids or it's over. I accepted his kids but didn't sign up to be treated like shit and told to deal with it. Ready to leave him? After being usually abused by my stepfather, I lived with my dad. Recently, I discovered that he chose me over my former stepmother and half-sister. I was sexually abused between the ages 9, 13 by my stepfather. Both he and my mom will be behind bars for many years to come. When I was sent to live with my dad, I was broken. I barely spoke, didn't eat much if at all. I wasn't mad or angry. I was null of any kind of emotion. Basically, I was alive but wasn't living. I kept my interactions with everyone to the bare minimum. I was polite but didn't go out of my way to make conversation with anyone. I was more social with my dad but I kept it to a bare minimum. I had nothing left to say to anyone. It took me 2 years for me to be able to allow my dad to show any form of parental affection towards me. That's how withdrawn I had become. Dad was my rock throughout the whole thing. When I experienced night terrors, I would wake up and either find my dad holding my hand or him holding me. He drove me to all of my therapist appointments. He made sure I was eating properly. There were days, I would break down for no reason and he would just hold me and tell me that everything will be okay. He literally went above and beyond for me. I hated the city that we were living in. Because I had so many bad experiences there, it made living there miserable. I was so passive, it was scary. My therapist had told my dad that I was stuck in the victim cycle. I didn't know how to get out. Because of this, I was bullied quite a bit. By the time I was 15, I had been to 3 different schools. It got to the point where my dad pulled me out of public school and enrolled me into online classes. I was always very studious and managed to maintain a 94% average overall, but my life lacked any sort of direction. Nothing would motivate me. Looking back, Dad did spoil me, but at the time I wasn't aware of it. I was so in my own body that I barely acknowledged my surroundings. If I asked my dad for a new bedspread, I would get me a new one plus new furniture. My phone of 5 years broke and Dad got a new one plus a laptop. I was grateful and thanked him. I did share with my half-sister and stepsister at the time. Again, I was being polite. I didn't have any form of relationship with my former stepmother, stepsister, or half-sister. I barely knew what it was like being a son at the time, let alone being a brother. By the time I was 16, Dad had approached me and told me that he are moving out. I didn't question it. He had asked me to pack my things and we moved into a rental. I didn't think it was any of my business, so I didn't press the issue. A year later, Dad had divorced my stepmother. One of Dad's business acquaintances offered him a partnership in Boston and he took it. We moved and I felt I was ready to start my senior year of high school in a public school. That year was probably the best year of my life. I was coming out of my shell. There was no fear of being judged or being the odd man out. It was as if I was like everyone else. I felt normal. I became more social, made a lot of friends, got into sports, clubs, and went out more. Us moving probably saved my life. Because we had moved 9 hours away from my half-sister, she would only come visit us on long weekends, a month during summer break. There was always a form of tension between my dad and half-sister. You could just sense it. It got to the point where as she got older, she stopped coming entirely. Me and Dad have always been close. When I had graduated from high school and gave my valedictorian speech, I could see my dad crying in the crowd. I lived with my dad while I attended college. I still do for the time being. Ever since I was a child, I always wanted to be a doctor. Well, I just finished my first year of medical school. Honestly, I feel like a normal young adult in society. I have a job, friends, a boyfriend whom I've been with for 4 years. I'm thriving in all aspects of my life. Recently, I got a FB message from my half-sister. She was apologizing a lot, and I had no clue what she was talking about. Turns out, the reason why Dad and I moved out from my stepmother's home was because my half-sister told my stepmother that I was watching her change. Yes, she told her mom that I was watching her change. At the time, I was traumatized of sex. Heck, I was terrified of any form of intimacy. The kid was envious of what Dad was doing for me. She was so envious that she tried to move me out. Well, I guess her mom and my dad got into a big fight and I'm only going to assume that she did not want me in the house. Because we moved out. I think it's safe to assume my dad didn't believe it. How can someone be so cruel? What did I ever do to her? Those were the questions that were racing through my head. I didn't even respond. More importantly, Dad never let this get back to me. Chances are if I had heard about this when I was 16, that would have been the final nail in the coffin. It also explains the tension between my dad and half-sister. This is a lot to take in and I have a newfound respect and love for my dad. He gave up this marriage for me so I could live a normal life. Dad is away on a business trip and won't be back for a few more days. I'm missing him a lot lately. Should I bring it up to him when he returns? Also, would it be fair for me to just cut my half-sister out of my life entirely? At the same time, it's sad that their relationship is almost non-existent and I almost want to help. Teal.er. Dad chose me over my stepmother and half-sister after my half-sister told a very dangerous lie that could have potentially ruined my life. Dad kept it from me for 6 years. Should I bring up with him? Edit. I wasn't expecting such a huge response. I just wanted to say thank you for all the feedback. It will take some time, but I will read all of them or as much as I can. As I was going through the comments, I found a number of people questioning the integrity of this. This is a part of my life. I don't normally like to talk about this. Aside from myself, my dad and close friends, not many people know about this. The fact that people are saying that it's fake. I don't know what to say. It's not my place to try and convince anyone. Believe me, there are times I wish could convince myself it's not real, but that's not possible. When I wrote this, I wasn't thinking about syntax. It was more just getting this out. People question its integrity based on grammatical errors. Forgive me, but I wasn't in the mindset to reread and go over it. As for how I became valedictorian, and a number of people were very curious, I did respond to it in the comments, but I'll post it here too. It was very unorthodox how I became valedictorian after attending a real HS for only a year. My overall average was the highest in my graduating class, but because I was in online classes for my previous years, I wasn't eligible at the time. I met with the grade coordinator and inquired about my chances, and her response was the same. I broke down in front of the coordinator and I told her the truth. Being named valedictorian was something I always wanted. To be that would have been my first accomplishment that I would have achieved based on my own merit. Yes, there is also the likelihood of getting a free ride to colleges. It wasn't trying to be valedictorian for financial reasons. Money wasn't a problem. Dad did make a lot. It was more this being my first official achievement. This would have helped me self-worth as well. The girl who was originally going to be valedictorian did meet with me and I told her the truth. She actually talked to the administration to let me valedictorian instead. It's something I'll forever be grateful for. That's actually how me and her became friends. Not many people would do that, and in HS. I'll be posting again, I just need a few days. An old friend of mine has been acting inappropriately towards my daughter. I am taking steps to protect her. The last few months I've been chatting to a friend more regularly than before. We've been friends for over a decade, and we used to be really close, but we slowly drifted apart. I should probably mention we are both men in our 40s. It's been great catching up with him, and honestly I really needed a friend, so it's just been great. He's got a long-term girlfriend and 2 young children. A couple of months ago we visited his house for the first time. He recently moved and we weren't speaking much before that, just an occasional comment on Facebook. And me, my 14-year-old son and 20-year-old daughter spent a few hours honestly just chatting about nothing, but in a good way, you know. While we were there I noticed that he kept looking at my daughter out of the corner of his eye. I never really caught him fully looking, so I thought nothing of it, especially as he has known my kids for over a decade. I didn't mention it to my daughter as I didn't want to make her feel uncomfortable if it was nothing. A couple of months went past and we visited them again. He kept talking to my daughter and not really to me, which is fine, but it just seemed odd when my daughter has really bad anxiety, and she can't really hold a conversation, and she makes it clear when she's uncomfortable talking. He just seemed to keep looking at her and talking. Even if he was talking to me, he would just look at her. The final straw was last week. We visited them and we've been having a heat wave, so we were all dressed in as minimal as possible. My daughter in a thin pair of skirts and a t-shirt, my son in a pair of athletic shorts and a gym top, and me in a polo shirt and white chino shorts. Nothing unusual, just basic summer wear. When we were in conversation he would look at my daughter. When anyone told a joke he would smirk a little or give a small laugh depending, but if my daughter told something mildly funny he would really laugh to the point that even she would look awkward. He kept dropping out of conversation and just staring at her. I think she noticed it as well because she started to lean back in her chair to try to cover herself. Even though she was fine. She looked uncomfortable. Then when the sun set she put on a thick jacket and zipped it up. I don't know if he's just trying to be friendly and he doesn't know how to act, or if he's only inviting us round to stare at her, and if so then I don't know what to do. Yes, she's 20 but she's still my little girl and this man watched her grow up. It just seems strange. I don't know if I should say something or just don't go around there again. Either way, I think it's the end of the friendship, which is a shame, but, oh well. Update. Edits at the end of post update from my last post. I spoke to my daughter about the whole thing and wanted to know what she thought about it all because I didn't want to say anything if she didn't think it was odd. She told me that after the first time we saw him again, a few months ago, he had appeared outside her work after she finished her shift and asked if she wanted a lift home instead of getting the bus. She said that since he was a good friend of mine, she trusted him and got in his car. On the ride home, he repeatedly touched her leg and started talking about how much she's changed since he saw her last, before we all met up, and how much of an adult she looks now. He told her she's growing into her body like a good girl. My daughter said that she would walk the rest of the way home because she didn't want to put him out too much, but he insisted on driving her all the way. She said she kept moving away from him, but he was leaning to touch her knees. She said that at a red light not long before the house, he gave her his mobile number and texted himself from her phone and told her to call him if she wanted a lift or anything else. Then when she got home, she went to leave the car, but he grabbed her arm and asked her where his hug and kiss goodbye was. Not a new thing. He gives us all a hug every time. And when she leaned in, he held her tight and whispered that she should call him. In the last few months since then, he has repeatedly been sending her explicit texts and images and waiting outside her work asking her if she would like a lift home, even though every time she's said no. She said she didn't want to say anything because she didn't want to upset me as he was the only friend I had. I feel sick thinking about this. This is my daughter. She's 20, but she's still my little girl, and I feel like I've put her in danger. I've messaged him asking him to stop contacting my family, and I've sent him the screenshots from her phone as reasons why, but he is messaging me asking me why when she is an adult, and the only sleazy thing he's done is cheat on his girlfriend, as my daughter never physically said the word stop, she just ignored him. I'm so angry at him and myself. Edit. I'd like to say thanks to everyone for the advice. Also, I've been getting a lot of mom comments, and although I appreciate the sentiment very much, I am her dad. Unfortunately, her mom passed away quite a few years ago, but I really appreciate that everyone thought I was her mom. It really is the biggest compliment to me. I must be doing something right. We went and spoke to our local police, and they couldn't really help us as she had willingly gotten into his car. They did say that as we have spoken to him already, they could keep a file open, and if it continues then they would be able to take action. Honestly, it seems that they don't really care about it at all, which is alarming and upsetting. We sent the screenshots and an explanation to his girlfriend, and we've had some missed calls from him, but that's not our problem. We've blocked him on everything and have completely removed him from every social media. My daughter has spoken to her work, and they have said that until she is able to find another job, they will ensure that at least one other member of staff will wait with her for the bus, and I will be meeting her at the first stop in our town to take her directly home on days I'm not working, and on days I am, then her grandparents will be picking her up. She is safe. I also had a lot of comments suggesting I get violent with this man. Although I do appreciate that a lot of people would be choosing the other route of resolving the problem face to face, I'm not like that. I'd like to be. I'd like to say that there's no problem I couldn't solve that way. But that's simply not me. It doesn't make me a bad dad either. I found another way to solve the problem and make sure my daughter is safe and comfortable. Thank you all for your help and advice. It's nice to find some support through the internet sometimes. Relevant comments. Commenter. It's not your fault, but you need to have a sit down and talk through the socialization for women to be nice and how to get past that mental block. This is something a lot of us go through, and it puts us in really awful situations. Help her understand that her safety is the most important thing. She doesn't have to be nice or put up with things like this. There's probably some very eloquent people who can speak to this topic on YouTube. It's not me, but I want to make sure she knows she doesn't have to take this shit for the rest of her life, even with the anxiety and desire not to rock any boats. OP. I've told her many times growing up that if she doesn't feel comfortable doing something, no matter what it is, then she needs to say that. It doesn't matter if it upsets someone or offends someone. All that matters is that she is safe and comfortable. I'm hoping that she will be like this from now on, and I just hope that she knows I'm here for her no matter what. Also, there's an update to the post. Thank you for your comment. Get her a weapon. We're in the UK, so she's legally not allowed any weapons, including pepper spray. The only thing she is allowed is an alarm, which she already had anyway. We are looking into some objects which can be carried around legally or discreetly. Currently we are looking into a keyring, which is like a long sharpened stick, though there's not many places willing to ship them to us. I'm so very sorry to hear what you have been through, and I wish you well throughout your life. I really hate my stepmother, and I don't know how to tell my dad about it without causing a big issue. I'm feeling very stuck right now. Hey, this might be a long one. I'm sorry. It is too long. I didn't read at the bottom. I really don't know what to do about my situation, and I don't have anyone close to give me advice, so I thought here I can maybe get some advice. I have an amazing dad who raised me since my mom passed away when I was 5 years old. He is my friend, my supporter and someone who I want to be like when I grow up. When my dad first introduced my stepmom to me I was 10 years old, and she was very nice to me and he looked so happy that we met and hoped we could get along. They got married when I was 13 and I was so happy that my dad and I had a new member in our family. I thought me and stepmother were getting along until I think a few months after their honeymoon she told me one morning that we just need to pretend to like each around my dad, but when he is not here that I shouldn't bother her. Honestly, this shattered me, but I agreed cause I didn't know what else to do. After that day, whenever it was just me and stepmother, she would say things to get to me, and I would just not say anything. I'm introverted and don't like confrontation, so I just took it and thought over time she would get over it, but it got worse. She would talk about my height and weight and say I was a funny-looking version of my dad. I hoped my dad would notice, but he didn't. He actually thinks me and stepmother are so close and she understands me. He looks so happy with her that maybe it's worth not saying anything and giving it time. This year my stepmother has started picking on me around my dad and he has either joined in or ignored it. I have voiced that what she says makes me uncomfortable and hurts, but my dad says she is teasing and doesn't mean it to hurt me. Well, right now, I'm at my ends and I'm scared, I'm angry, frustrated at my stepmother and my dad. Dad was away for work and it was just me and stepmother at home. She had a party at home with a couple of her friends. I helped set the house up and cook dinner cause dad asked me to help out, which was fine. After they ate and just hung out, they were hanging out on the porch when I heard stepmother and her friends talking very loudly outside my window while I was in my room. Stepmother friends talked about how lucky stepmother was to have a nice husband and a house. When they mentioned how nice it was that I cooked for them, stepmother told them that I was annoying and weird and she hated me and living with me and couldn't wait till I was 18 to kick me out. I was shocked that she hated me that much, but I didn't know why. TBH. I thought we were tolerating each other, but to hate me I must have done something, but I can't think of what I did. I've been kinda down since that day, which was 2 weeks ago, and I thought I was past the initial feelings, but at rugby training today I bursted into tears and my coach sent me home, so I drove to a beach and cried. I feel so much I honestly can't describe my emotions. I eventually fell asleep in my car. Now I'm here hoping I can get advice on how to talk to my dad about it, cause I'm scared about how he will react. I don't want my dad to be sad cause he does so much for me, but I'm not strong like him. I'm really struggling. My question is, how can I approach this conversation with my dad about my stepmother hating me? Or should I tell him at all? Too long. Didn't read. I heard my stepmother tell her friends she hates me, and I want to tell my dad about it but don't know how. Edit. Someone questioned my dad's age, and I'm sorry. But it was supposed to be 42, but I can't change it. Sorry. Thank you everyone that provided advice and kind words. It means a lot to me. I have read every comment and have an idea on how to approach this situation. I'm honestly terrified of the outcome being negative, but the encouragement and support are making this a bit easier to deal with. I am going to talk to my dad on Sunday and show him this post. I hope it goes well and I hope all of you stay safe and take care. Edit 2. I'm not sure what I am able to do what I planned, cause Amy just took my car keys away and she wants my phone, but I won't give it to her, so she is waiting for my dad to take it off me because apparently I'm doing drugs, but I told her I'm not. I've been at the beach. I'm not sure, but I just want it to stop cause I can't handle it. I'm sorry. Update 1. Okay. So my post was locked, but hopefully it's okay now. I've posted the link and tried my best with spacing. I'm on mobile. If I can't post it, I give up. For all the support and advice received, I really appreciate and wholeheartedly so grateful for all who DM me to see how I was. Thank you. This will be long because a lot has happened, but many things are still not resolved. Trigger warning. I will mention self-harm, so please, if it might trigger you, please don't read further. I wish I was able to say I followed the advice that was provided, and now everything is better, but some things in life don't play the way we want it to, and we can either let it destroy us, or make us better. After writing my edit where my stepmother was taking my things away and assuming I was on drugs, I started recording on my phone and she said a lot through the door, many things about my mom and me, and just plain hateful words that I don't want to repeat on here. I fell asleep while I was barricading the door with my body when my dad demanded that I open the door. At this point, I don't remember much of what happened, but my stepmother told me I had to leave the house, and my dad agreed. I didn't know who to call, but I decided to call my coach and he picked me up, and I was a crying mess. He didn't ask any questions but just told me that I was safe and if I needed to talk he was here for me. I stayed over one night when Dad picked me up. Stepmother was not at home when we got there. Dad told me we needed to talk. We had breakfast and my dad spoke to me about many things my stepmother told him, and I couldn't believe all the lies she told him. It was a long talk, but in summary it was my use of drugs and alcohol, How I disrespect her in our home. I don't do my responsibilities like chores at home. I'm nasty to her when dad is not around. He asked me why I was acting like this, and if I had a problem with my stepmother I should have spoken to him. I let him talk, and when he was crying and asked if I had anything to say, I was so lost for words. I knew whatever I said my dad was on my stepmother's side. So I told him I wanted him to watch the recording of the incident that I can send through as an email attachment and the link to my Reddit post, and then we can talk more. I also said I didn't want to be here when he was reading and watching, so I'll go for a drive and he can text me when he's done and ready to talk. He was hesitant at first, but I told him it was important to me, so he agreed, and I left in my car to the beach and sent the email with the video attached and the link to my Reddit post. I don't know how long I waited, but many thoughts were going through my head. I was missing my mom so much, and what if my dad still sided with my stepmother? What can I do now? I fell asleep at the beach spot and was woken up by a police officer knocking on my car door and asking for my name. After confirming my name, he advised me to get out my car and to hand over my keys to him and to follow him to his car. He handcuffed me and assured me that I wasn't in trouble. But this was a welfare check cause someone made a call that I was possibly suicidal. I didn't talk after he told me that, and all I remember was just crying. He made me sit in the back of the police car until the ambulance came and they took me to the hospital. I was asked many questions and was evaluated and was told I was depressed and may have extreme anxiety. The physician did say I might have other things but will require further testing and some sessions with a psychiatrist. My dad came and visited me while in hospital, and when I saw him he looked really tired. When he spoke it sounded like he was crying, and he told me he called the police on me because the video recording I did, he heard everything my stepmother said, but he also saw cuts on my thighs and was scared, and thought the worst. Honestly, I never watched the video, so I didn't know my thighs were visible. After our cry we spoke about a few things. I told my dad that I don't feel comfortable living with stepmother after everything she said and done to me over the years, and I'm not sure I can handle being around her cause I don't trust her. We spoke about arrangements and knowing my dad still loves my stepmother and I didn't want him to choose between us. I told him that I could talk to Coach if I could stay with him, and after calling him he agreed. I've also been admitted to an agency that will support me cause I am mentally unwell. I have been to one session and waiting on another evaluation to be done on me and some testings with my general practitioner so they can diagnose me. I'm currently staying with my rugby coach who has been an amazing pillar. He has set out some house rules but I respect the fella and don't mind following them. My coach even set a date next week for me and dad to catch up on. My coach is an awesome dude. I thought of him as just a coach who just wanted our rugby team to win, but when he allowed me to stay over, he showed so much care for me, and I saw a side to him and understand how much he cares for my team. He has a lovely wife, but I'm kinda anxious whenever it's just me and her at their house. That's it right now. My dad lives at home with my stepmother and is trying to sort that out. I have many appointments to get the help I need and a lot of schoolwork to catch up on and rugby training to attend. I've taken a leave of absence from my Macca's job. I'm gonna miss going to the beach for a while, but I understand that it's not a forever thing, so I hope that the next time I go there I'm not crying my eyes out. I'm kinda working on being okay if my dad and stepmother, after those of you who shared your similar experiences, someday I'll be okay. Thank you to all who advised me and encouraged me. Those who reached out through direct message. Thank you for the kind words and reaching out. I'm not sure if I'll update again, but maybe I'll let you know if something happens in the future. Take care everyone, also be kind to one another and most of all be kind to yourself, cause you deserve it. Too long. Didn't read. I showed my dad my Reddit post and recording of my stepmother being verbally abusive, and now I'm staying at my coach's house trying to sort out my mental health update too. Hope everyone has been doing well. I wasn't going to update at all, but many who reached out shared their stories and kind words. It truly helped me. I wish I was able to reply, but so many things were happening and I'm sorry. This will be a long one, but it's because this will be the last time, I hope. In my last post my coach sorted out time for me and my dad to catch up weekly. I've met up with my dad twice and this is how it went. First, catch up at the beach. We spoke and I told him a lot about what happened between me and his wife. I mentioned how she would treated me when he wasn't there, what she spoke to me after they got married and how she was awful to live with. I told him how I dealt with it for his sake cause I wanted him to be happy. I mentioned to him that I spoke with the coach about staying there until I go to university, and then I'll move away cause I cannot live with his wife anymore cause I'm not sure what I'll do. I'm never gonna try and get along with her anymore. He listened and was crying and asked if I would ever get over this. I told him no and I never wanted to see his wife and walked off cause I was pissed off at what he said and drove back to the coach's house. He messaged me later. I acted like a kid, and I responded, cause I am a kid. Second, catch up dinner at the coach's house. Second, catch up, My coach invited my dad to have dinner and hang with me. My coach has a pool table in his man cave and a pool. I was excited to hang and catch up with my dad even after our last meetup because I was feeling a bit better. But at the same time I was feeling anxious about the meetup, like I had a bad gut feeling. But I ignored it. Dinner went great, and me, dad and coach had fun playing pool. Later on that night the coach gave us space to talk. Dad talked about my mom and me as a kid. Just things he would tell me when I was a kid, and it was just me and him. It was fun, and I really enjoyed our time together. When it was time to go home I offered to drop him off since he drank, but he said his wife was here to pick him up, so I hugged him and he went. I kinda stayed in the garage and waited for her to leave so I could walk in the house, but I heard her say, "How's the little shit?" And I bolted out the door and told her to fuck off. Boy, was I not ready for the slap my dad gave me, but all I remember was swinging a punch at him and knocking him down and my coach pulling me off my dad. My coach told my dad and his wife to leave. After they left I told my coach I never wanted to see him again and texted my dad we were done. It doesn't end there. Last week I planned to not go to school on Friday and go for a drive up the line with a few teammates to just get away from everything. They ended up bailing, so I went by myself. I ended up driving to a lake and parking up and just chilling for the school day and just driving back home later on. When I got home at my coach's house I saw my dad's car parked in the driveway and thought I would have to square up with my dad. When I parked up my dad ran out the house and looked like shit. He looked like he cried for days and he started hitting my car screaming to get out the car and tell him where I was the whole day. I thought he was mad that I wagged school, so he ripped the door open and hugged me so hard and cried. I had no idea what was happening or what he was saying, but all I could understand was, "I'm sorry, and I love you." After what felt like forever he kinda calmed me down and I asked him why he was here. And then he told me there was an accident with a kid getting hit by a train. And it clicked, my dad thought it was me. He said when he heard the news he called the school and they said I was a no-show and called everyone he could think of. My mates said I went for a drive somewhere but didn't know where, and my dad said he lost it. He calmed down eventually and said he would divorce his wife if I wanted him to. But I told him he needed to choose that for himself. 'Cause the reason I stayed quiet was to make him happy. If he is unhappy, to make a choice for himself. 'Cause I don't want to be the reason he is unhappy, and that now I have to look after myself, and that is getting away from her. And he cried and just said, "More sorries." He ended up sleeping over in the same room as me that night and the night after, 'cause I think he was scared, and just trying to deal. I was okay with it and coach allowed it. He left after the weekend to sort himself out back at his home. I told him that where I am is good for me, and to not worry, and that I'll turn off Do Not Disturb on my phone so I could see texts. That's pretty much it really. I don't know what my dad is going to decide to do with his wife, but I am definitely not ever going to associate with her. Ever in the foreseeable future. I love my dad too much to stop seeing him, but he knows my boundaries since I've set them out clear as day, and he knows as much as I love him. I will cut him off if I feel like it's not for me. I'm moving past what happened between me and my dad's wife for me, 'cause I'm tired of letting her beat me in my mind, so I just gotta work on myself. I'm currently happy staying with my coach and his wife. They have been amazing and have shown me so much love. They have awesome kids who I have met and they have invited me to their family Christmas. I feel bad that I feel anxious when I'm around the coach's wife, but I'm working on it with my therapist and I have a good support system. I know I want to go to university but not sure if I want to study commerce or law. But I know I am on track with my studies, I just can't afford to skip school anymore. Thank you to everyone who sent messages of support and reached out to share your experiences. Y'all gave me the strength to believe I could get out of this mess and be okay. And if you ever feel down, that there is help out there for you no matter where you are in life. I'm glad I shared on Reddit, 'cause I've learned so much about me and many things I won't forget and teach to my kids. Now I gotta go school. Take care and cheers. OP posted in Mom for a Minute on Sept 27/22 about turning 18. Can't repost from this sub. I hate that my current reality is that I don't have people I can rely on right now in my life. I am trying to do the best to survive and better my current situation. I've had so much happen to me this year and I feel like I can't afford to take time for myself, to catch a break, or else I'll lose what I currently have, which is not much. I know I'm young and have so much to look forward to, but it's hard. Like so hard to want to carry on when so much shit is going wrong. I'm trying to find a place to stay even in a flatmate situation to be more independent, but I can barely afford anything. My job offered me a better paying position at the expense of a full-time job, and even though I would love more money, that means I will have to give up my dream to go university. I know many people have had worse situations and honestly, I don't know how they found the will and help they got. It really feels like the world just hates me and I know I'm feeling sorry for myself, but I honestly giving up hope. What can I get the family I'm staying with for Christmas? 18 Nem. feel indifferent about catching up with my dad. 42 male. I, 18 male, have a strained relationship with my dad. 42 male. A lot has happened this year between us and it really ruined our relationship. He was my best friend, would be there for my rugby matches and push me to do my best. Earlier this year I had a fallout with my stepmom and my dad which caused me to move out of my home and in with my coach, 37 mem, who I call uncle. I have been here ever since. We did try to mend our relationship but harsh words were exchanged and I stopped reaching out and focused on passing my exams. Sister-in-law hated me for years, had a tragic miscarriage. Then we welcomed her back, but she told my child she was his real mom. My sister-in-law despised me for years, but after she suffered a tragic miscarriage, we welcomed her back into our lives. Unfortunately, she began telling my child that she was his real mother. David and I have been happily married for 8 years, and we have a 4-year-old son named Tom. Tom is a lively, imaginative kid. Very attached to me, and a bit of a mama's boy. I cherish this bond, knowing that as he grows older, his interests will change, and he might not want to spend as much time with me. David and I make a great team, managing our home, raising Tom, and pursuing our careers seamlessly. This harmony stems from David's respectful and communicative nature, which has fostered a strong partnership between us. However, despite our smooth sailing, there's an ongoing issue with David's sister, Kathy. From the very beginning, Kathy has been difficult to get along with, maintaining a cold attitude towards me. David had warned me early on that while his parents would likely accept me, Kathy would be tough due to her protective nature. He was right. When we first met, Kathy bombarded me with questions about my background, all the while acting unimpressed and condescending. She would also bring up David's exes in our conversations, comparing them to me as if it were normal. During one dinner, she even suggested David join her and her friends on a girls' trip, claiming he needed to clear his head before committing to me. This remark annoyed me and David noticed, asking her to back off politely. This brings me to a point of contention with my husband. While he does defend me, his affection for Kathy sometimes prevents him from setting firm boundaries. This emboldens her to keep pushing, believing she has his best interests at heart simply because she's the older sister. From that first dinner date, I knew Kathy and I didn't like each other. It stung a bit, but I wasn't about to bend over backward to win her over if she had already made up her mind. Despite this, I always remained polite during our encounters, though she never made it easy. One incident that stands out is David's grandparents' anniversary party. The entire family was invited, and I attended as David's +1 since we'd been dating for a year by then. Throughout the party, I enjoyed chatting with his friendly and easygoing family. The one person who completely ignored me was Kathy. I noticed and tried to stay out of her way. When everyone gathered for a group photo, Kathy loudly pointed me out, demanding I step out of the picture. She suggested David might break up with me and didn't want one of her brother's bimbos in the family photo. I was mortified as everyone around us looked uncomfortable. David tried to argue, but Kathy kept interrupting, saying I was just a random stranger and shouldn't have been at the party. Humiliated, I excused myself to find my car keys, determined not to spend another minute near her. David and his parents followed me, apologizing profusely. His mother tried to persuade me to return, but the moment was ruined. I heard his grandparents scolding Kathy, making me feel even guiltier for spoiling the day. I left immediately, considering breaking up with David, thinking I couldn't handle his sister's behavior. However, David showed up at my place later with flowers and pastries, apologizing sincerely. He told me everyone had reprimanded Kathy for her rudeness, and he had threatened to cut ties with her, which made her cry. David expressed his frustration with his sister's antics and reassured me he didn't want anything to do with her anymore. We had a long talk, and I felt comforted by his support. In the following days, David kept his promise. We stopped seeing Kathy altogether, and he ignored her calls. When she showed up unannounced at his house, he changed the locks and asked his parents to talk to her about respecting his privacy. With his parents' support, Kathy had no choice but to accept that her brother wanted nothing to do with her. We hoped this would make her reconsider her behavior, but it had the opposite effect. Kathy started calling and texting me, leaving threatening messages and blaming me for everything. The breaking point came when Kathy showed up at my workplace one afternoon, demanding to see me. Thankfully, my manager intervened and kicked her out, but the incident left me deeply shaken. I told David that I had no choice but to break up with him to escape his sister's harassment and consider taking legal action against her. David was devastated, pleading with me not to end our relationship and promising he would handle the situation. David then convinced his parents to arrange a meeting with Kathy at their home. During this confrontation, his parents, fully aware of what Kathy had been doing, made it clear they wanted nothing to do with her unless she changed her behavior. They all warned Kathy that her actions were borderline crazy, and if she continued, they would support my decision to take legal action. Miraculously, Kathy finally broke down and admitted she needed help. She confessed to feeling out of control and revealed she had lost her job and had been unemployed for months, worsening her mental state. David's parents took immediate action, admitting her to a psychiatric hospital where she could be monitored. David reiterated that he did not wish to maintain contact with her, which Kathy reluctantly accepted. She sent me an apology text that felt somewhat insincere, but I hoped for her sake that she would heal. When David and I finally married, we chose not to invite Kathy, even though she had been discharged and seemed to be doing better. I wanted nothing to do with her, and everyone respected my decision. Kathy did send flowers to congratulate us, which I appreciated. After we returned from our honeymoon, Kathy announced her engagement. It surprised everyone, as no one knew she had been dating. We were cautiously happy for her until we learned she was marrying a man she met in the psychiatric hospital. This man, James, was schizophrenic and an alcoholic with violent tendencies, according to his doctors. Understandably, David and Kathy's parents were concerned. Kathy planned her wedding for the following month and only invited David, excluding me. While I wasn't surprised and felt relieved not to have to make an excuse, David was offended by the exclusion and chose not to attend. Those who did attend the wedding later told us it was a disaster. Kathy and James were heavily intoxicated during the ceremony and couldn't even properly repeat the vows after the priest. During the reception, James continued drinking until he was blackout drunk, then started ripping open his shirt and pants while everyone watched in horror. Being schizophrenic, James didn't like the attention and suddenly attacked a server, accusing the innocent bystander of looking suspicious and hiding something. His family managed to calm him down and paid off the server to avoid pressing charges. This incident deeply scarred everyone, raising serious concerns about Kathy's safety. If James could attack a stranger, what was to stop him from attacking Kathy? David and his parents tried to talk to Kathy about her husband's disturbing behavior, but she was convinced she could change him. Despite their warnings, Kathy believed James would never harm her. Unfortunately, she was wrong. Over the years, James isolated her, cutting off contact with family and preventing her from seeking help. Though there were instances of police being called due to their violent arguments, Kathy refused to leave him, convinced he was the one for her. 4 years ago, I became pregnant with Tom, and we were all overjoyed. I wanted Kathy to be part of my baby shower, so we sent her an invitation. When we received no reply, David drove to her place to check on her. He discovered that James had cut her off from any communication with us and thrown away the invitation. David confronted James, but Kathy defended her husband, refusing to see his wrongdoing. Frustrated, David left, and we lost contact with her. Even after Tom was born, we did not reach out, and her parents eventually stopped trying to convince her, hoping she would be okay. The past few years with Tom have been peaceful and full of love. David and I have found a wonderful rhythm in our marriage, and Tom keeps us busy with his curiosity. David's parents visit every weekend to babysit while we have our date night, allowing us some time off and giving the grandparents quality time with Tom. Everything was going well until 8 months ago when Kathy showed up at our doorstep, muddy and disheveled, with no shoes on. We immediately let her in, and I fetched her a blanket as she was shivering. We hadn't seen her in years and were at a loss for words. David comforted her, asking if she was okay. Kathy looked numb, staring into space. Eventually, she revealed that she had just miscarried. We listened in shock as she recounted how she had gotten pregnant a month ago, initially believing James would be happy. However, he grew increasingly paranoid, fearing the baby would take her away from him. They fought frequently, and he even threatened to poison her food to cause a miscarriage. That day, she woke up feeling uneasy, and at the doctor's, she found out she had lost the baby. Numb and sick, she couldn't drive home, so she walked, eventually ending up at our house. She must have walked at least 20 blocks barefoot, but she couldn't remember why she had no shoes on. I felt so sorry for her and immediately gave her a hug. At first, she hesitated, but then she hugged me back. We sat there for 5 whole minutes as Kathy cried into my arms. We knew then that this was her way of asking for help. David seemed ready to confront James directly, but I convinced him to call the police and notify their parents, who were better equipped to handle the situation. His parents were incredibly grateful to have their daughter back and assured her of their unwavering support. When the police took her statement, they were as shocked as we were by the abuse Kathy had endured. James was arrested despite his protests and threats, continually denying his involvement in her miscarriage. However, Kathy's toxicology report revealed she had been poisoned, leading to the loss of her baby. In the end, due to James's mental issues and his incompetence to stand trial, the judge sentenced him to an indefinite stay in a psychiatric facility for treatment. Although this was frustrating, we were grateful to have Kathy back safe and sound. By then all my previous animosity towards her had vanished. As a woman, I felt immense sympathy for her and wanted to move past our history to help her heal. Kathy also seemed calmer and no longer hostile towards me. When we felt she was ready, we introduced Tom to her, hoping it would aid her recovery. She grew very close to Tom in a short time, which none of us minded initially. This should have been my first red flag. Over the weeks, she found ways to spend more and more time with my son, often showing up unexpectedly at our house. Staying with her and David's parents made it easy for her to drive over unannounced. She insisted on giving Tom baths and reading his bedtime stories, gestures that initially seemed kind but gradually felt intrusive. Kathy's increasing presence started to feel odd. She visited almost daily, staying longer than necessary, bringing toys and gifts for Tom, and always seeking involvement in his daily routines. She would comment on his clothes or hairstyle, suggesting how Tom would look better, which bothered me. While I appreciated her efforts to bond with Tom, it began to feel like she was undermining me again, this time through my son. My maternal instincts kicked in, and I talked to David. He assured me that I might be overthinking and that his sister was just trying to cope with her pain. He reminded me of her recent loss, making me feel guilty. I decided to let her be, thinking if taking care of Tom made her happy, what was the harm? As days went on, I tried my best to accommodate her constant presence. She started looking after Tom daily while we were at work and even took him to the park in the evenings. Sometimes when I came home, I noticed that my son no longer greeted me with the same enthusiasm. He wouldn't run up to me, and instead, looked at me with curiosity. After Kathy left, I would try to talk to Tom about his day and whether he had any issues with Kathy, but he was less engaged and seemed sad. As his mother, this change in his behavior worried me deeply. However, when I discussed it with my husband, he would gently dismiss my concerns, assuring me that Tom was just growing up and I was overthinking. The nagging feeling persisted, so I confided in a coworker, who suggested installing nanny cams from Amazon in Tom's room and our living room to monitor him. I thought this was a brilliant idea and promptly bought 2 cameras. I didn't inform David about this, not wanting him to dismiss my concerns again. Yesterday, after Tom went to bed, I decided to check the nanny cams. While David watched TV downstairs, I retreated to my study to review the footage, which included audio. Initially, it was just Kathy playing and caring for Tom, appearing very good with children. However, I was shocked when she pulled a book from her purse, one I hadn't seen before. We usually have age-appropriate books for Tom, but this one was different. She read the book to Tom before his nap. As I listened, I realized the story was about adoption and how a mother sometimes gives her child to another mother to care for. Kathy added her own commentary, telling Tom that this was why she had left him in my care years ago because she wasn't ready then. My eyes widened in horror as she continued, claiming that she would always be his real mother and no one could love him more than she did. She kissed his forehead and left him to nap. My hands shook with anger as I realized what she had been telling my son, causing his strange behavior. This poor child must be feeling incredibly confused. I was ready to confront David and demand that Kathy never be allowed in our home again, but I held back. Instead, I decided to take a day off to spend with Tom and understand what Kathy had been telling him. When I informed Kathy that she didn't need to babysit, she reacted anxiously, insisting that she loved spending time with Tom. I firmly told her to back off, wanting a day alone with my child. David asked if I was okay, and I reassured him that everything was fine but that I needed a break. Later, I took Tom to his favorite park, and we spent the day playing, eating pizza, and laughing. I wanted him to feel safe before broaching the conversation about what his aunt had been telling him. He got a bit quiet. I reassured Tom that he wasn't in trouble and that he could talk to me about anything. That's when he opened up. He told me how Kathy had been trying to convince him for weeks that she was his real mother. Though he didn't truly believe it, she also told him that I would eventually leave him because only real mothers love their children. Her insistence made him scared to ask me about it, fearing I might actually kick him out. He said he loved me and didn't want to go live with Kathy. Hearing those words broke my heart. I stared at his tear-streaked face, seeing a small and vulnerable child instead of the joyful and playful boy I knew. I knelt down, gently took his hands, and assured him that everything would be okay. We would get through this together. I hugged him tightly, feeling the weight of his fears and pain. I felt like a failure for not protecting my son from this psycho. I promised him that he had nothing to worry about and that David and I would take care of it. However, my son then told me that David already knew about all this. I asked what he meant and he said, "I asked Daddy, and he knows about this, but he told me not to tell you anything." My blood ran cold as I realized that my husband, despite knowing what his sister was up to, had chosen to protect her instead of our son. He knew everything. I couldn't let my son be around these people anymore. I didn't want him to be confused and frightened about his own mother. I was his mother, and it was my job to protect him from this. I quickly drove home and packed our bags. I told my parents we were coming over and that if David asked, we would say I missed them and wanted to spend time with them. Luckily, my parents are very supportive and immediately said yes. As I write this, I've already explained everything to my parents, and they are as shocked as I am about what Kathy has been telling my son. David did call when he came home to an empty house, but I tried to sound normal, telling him I needed a break from our place and work. He sounded curious, but I assured him I'd stay with my parents for just a few days. We rarely fight, so I guess he didn't think much about it, even though my behavior must have seemed strange to him. I am so conflicted right now. I have no idea what to do. How should I confront this situation? Am I the asshole for distancing my son and me from my husband's crazy sister? Update 1. Wow, I woke up to over 600 comments on my post. I can't believe so many people on Reddit have come across my story. I used fake names throughout, so hopefully, none of David's family members will realize it's about him. To those criticizing me for not talking to my husband first, I assure you, I would have if my son hadn't already tried to talk to David. My mother's instinct told me that since my husband knew for weeks about our son's changed behavior and kept gaslighting me, a confrontation with him wouldn't have been productive. I needed to get my son out of the situation immediately, and he is now much safer with my parents. No one can feed him lies here, and that's all that matters. Kathy has been trying to contact me, sending multiple messages insisting she needs to see my son and how much she misses him. I plan to put an end to this at the upcoming family get-together at David's parents' place this weekend. This gathering has been planned for weeks because David's grandparents are visiting, and I thought it would be a nice time to spend together. However, given recent events, I will use this opportunity to speak my truth and ensure Kathy stays away from my son for good. Update 2. I'm back with an update. I finally confronted David as planned during the family get-together. I was so nervous beforehand, but I decided to bring the nanny cam recording as proof. To cut to the chase, I called out Kathy in front of everyone during lunch. She looked shaken and tried to laugh it off as if it wasn't a big deal. Then I showed the nanny cam footage and explained that I had recorded what she told my son. I watched the color drain from her face as I sent the video to the family group chat for everyone to see. Her parents were horrified as they watched her try to convince my son that she was his real mommy. Next, I confronted David and told him how he failed to protect our son. My husband looked really guilty but tried to justify his actions, saying he didn't think much of it and thought it would help his sister cope with her grief. He felt torn between supporting his sister's recovery and telling me about it, ultimately choosing to keep quiet. I told him that because of his actions, I no longer trusted him and couldn't let our son be around him or his family. For the first time in a long while, I saw my husband break down in tears, but I stood firm. I made it clear that I couldn't let my son grow up in a family where his father refused to stand up for him to protect his mentally ill sister. David and Kathy's parents and grandparents apologized to me and assured me they would make sure Kathy stayed away from our son. Kathy looked utterly humiliated but didn't have the decency to apologize. David kept trying to justify his actions, but I ignored him. I left shortly after the confrontation, feeling that my work was done and wanting nothing more to do with any of them. Update 3. I see some of you are confused about my decision, so I wanted to clarify. Yes, I plan on divorcing my husband. I know many of you suggested giving David a second chance since this wasn't entirely his fault, and I agree that he is a good man. However, being a good man doesn't automatically make him a good father. Just because we never had issues doesn't mean he was a good father to Tom. He should have addressed this from the beginning when our son came to him with doubts, instead of spending weeks trying to cover it up and gaslighting me. Both Tom and I can't trust him anymore. I welcomed Kathy back into my life with open arms after what she went through because, as a woman, I felt sorry for her. But in the end, she proved why I never liked her in the first place. I understand that Kathy's abuse was extremely traumatic, but that doesn't mean our son should have to suffer for it. She is an adult with mental issues, and although we thought she had improved, she clearly hadn't. However, what really surprised me was my husband. The fact that he prioritized her mental well-being over our son's shows why he should never be around Tom. He was always such a supportive husband, and I thought I could trust him, but his actions regarding Kathy have shown otherwise. I promise that from now on, I will protect my son no matter what. I am confident I can get full custody of Tom if I expose his family history during the custody battle. I have an autism diagnosis appointment tomorrow, and I'm terrified my mom is going to sabotage everything. I'm 17 years old, I'm a fab, assigned female at birth, and my mom is about 49 years old. Tomorrow is my diagnostic appointment, and my mom is required to come with me so they can ask her a few questions about my childhood. Now here is why I'm scared. My mom believes that I'm just getting this because I'm paranoid and trying to pick as many mental illnesses as possible, even though I have clarified to her that I have been doing research for years. When I begged her to do some research on it herself, she refused. She literally just refused. Why? She isn't bothered to educate herself. Which, as much as it annoyed me, did not really matter. Or that's what I thought. My mom has been progressively changing things about my childhood. In the last few months I asked her when I started speaking, she replied about 4 years old, and that was what she told me for most of my life. In the past few weeks I asked her again, since the doctor asked me about it. She said I don't remember, maybe like 1 to 2 years old. Which is wildly different from what she said earlier. Same thing for when I asked her about my vocabulary. Before it was just a few words at most. Now it's advanced vocabulary. This evening, I was telling her to please say the truth. I don't care what the truth is, just say it. She replied with, I'll say whatever comes to my mind. I am so upset right now. I'm getting an anxiety attack in my room and crying right now. If my chances of getting a diagnosis gets ruined because of her, because she is not being truthful, I'm going to cry my eyes out of their sockets. I still have an entire childhood case history to fill in. I can't because she refuses to and changes everything up literally twice or thrice for the exact same question. What should I do? Should I tell the doctor about this? What do I even say? I am panicking so much. What if they completely dismiss me because she lies, or what if they misdiagnose me? Please give me some advice, I really need it right now. This is based in the United Kingdom, if this information helps. Response to OP. I'm sorry that you're feeling so anxious about tomorrow. I can imagine the test in itself already impacts you, and having such a worry on top of it sounds really stressful. My experience having been diagnosed with ADHD and autism is that the doctor or specialist didn't only take into account what my mom said, but also my mom's attitude during the conversation, the interaction between my mom and me, and how I responded both mentally and physically. I think that it could be worth expressing to your doctor that you worry about your mom's answers. But I'd also expect your doctor to look beyond the answers and pay attention to other signs that are relevant for the diagnosis. Another response to OP. I would share your concerns with your doctor, perhaps even print your post here and give it to them because it is pretty clearly stated. I don't know if you have any other diagnoses, but you're welcome to share this with her. I am nearly 50, 48 next month. I had received multiple inaccurate diagnoses since I was around 9 years old. It caused a lot of unnecessary struggles and stigmatization to say the least. When I finally got the right one of autism, everything fell into place and now the full picture of my past made sense. It effectively replaced the other diagnoses since now that my issues were seen as a whole, there were no longer singular diagnosis terms that only applied to a fraction of what was happening. Yes, I can still have some depression and symptoms of CPTSD, but they largely fall under the umbrella of autism. So rather than gathering diagnoses, I finally got the right one. And it has changed my life for the better. Update. I have had my autism evaluation today and the doctors have concluded that I'm autistic. This means so much to me, it's unbelievable. It's still weird because it does change a lot, since I was already self-diagnosed, but hey, at least it can help me out in university. This morning I woke up at 7 a.m., got out of the house at 8:45 and arrived there in time. I had 2 professionals evaluate me, which was nerve-wracking to say the least, but hey, I couldn't ask for more. The first 40 minutes were asking me questions, getting me to do certain activities which included this bizarre book about floating toads. IDK either LOL. For the last 20 minutes, they asked my mom to come in with the interpreter. We're immigrants, so her English isn't that good. I took the advice you all gave me yesterday, and before they invited her in, I informed them that she may not be able to remember all the details, and that my masking at home may affect some of what she says. They reassured me that this is not as important as the conversations we just had. They proceed to inform my mom with the conclusion that I'm highly likely to be autistic. My mom, stupidly, decided that the first thing she should say about that is, my daughter doesn't have autism, she thinks she does. They were immediately thrown off. She was supposed to sit there and answer questions, that's the whole reason she came in, but right after saying that they didn't even ask her one question. All of my childhood case history was handed over to me, and I did all of the talking. I can't believe that this has finally happened. I've been fighting for a diagnosis for almost 4 years and waited for about a year for this appointment. I am so happy now. Thanks to everyone who gave me advice and supported me yesterday, the love I was shown was so sweet, and I could have never been this understood by anyone other than you. I cannot stress how thankful I am that you took time off from your day to help me out. I sincerely thank everyone from the depth of my heart. You're all amazing people. I would also like to apologize for using the term autism diagnosis, as it was brought to my attention yesterday that it is not an appropriate terminology to use. So from now on, I will refer to it as an autism evaluation. Thank you very much to the user who highlighted this. I have shared this post with other subreddits, so some of the information mentioned may not be completely referring to this subreddit. If there are any specific details I should remove, please inform me. Thank you. After losing my job during the 2020 pandemic, I lived in a camper. Now, my parents are telling my brother to take my house because I don't have a family. My parents told my brother to take my house because I don't have a family. I'm a single man in my early 30s, and my brother, who is 29, already has 4 kids. He became a father at 22, followed by another child a year later, then a third 2 years after that, and his 4th was born just a few months ago. My sister-in-law and I don't get along. She constantly provokes me by acting superior, and when I retaliate, she becomes a dramatic victim, crying on cue and garnering sympathy from everyone around her. Despite knowing her true nature, my parents and brother adore her. I'll admit she's very attractive, but her personality is so awful that I could never be attracted to her. She refuses to work, even though she has a college degree, and my mother takes care of the kids all day. Their finances are solely dependent on my brother, forcing them to live at my parents' house due to their limited income. Privacy is a serious issue with all of them crammed into a 3-bedroom house from the 60s. My younger brother was always the favorite growing up. We're 3 years apart, but he developed a superiority complex because any retaliation from me was met with severe punishment. It was clear my parents favored him, giving him more of everything unless other family members intervened, which they often did. This led my parents to move us 150 miles away from our extended family to avoid scrutiny, resulting in us only seeing them on holidays. My brother was physically abusive, flirted with my first girlfriend until she broke up with me, and laughed at any of my misfortunes. My parents' advice was always to suck it up. They only treated me equally when they wanted to maintain appearances. It was almost amusing to see their discomfort when they had to treat me the same as my brother on birthdays and Christmas in front of others. Our nosy relatives loved gossip, so my parents worked hard to hide the reality, threatening to take away my possessions if I spoke out. When I turned 18, they celebrated my move out, even though I hadn't finished high school. Couch surfing was better than living with them. They didn't attend my high school graduation, but I didn't mind. Since then, I've only seen my parents and brother on holidays like the rest of the family. The 2020 pandemic hit me hard. I lost my job and couldn't renew my condo lease because my roommate also lost his job, and we couldn't afford the rent on unemployment. I love that 2-bedroom condo. As the lease ended, my roommate moved in with relatives, and I had to sell almost everything I owned to avoid homelessness. I shouldn't have rented such an expensive place, but I enjoyed the high life until it turned on me. I realized I should have chosen a cheaper place to save more money. I came up with a plan. I owned a truck because I love trucks, so I bought a $1,000 camper in good condition and attached it to my truck, planning to live in it temporarily. But I ended up living in it much longer. I initially hoped to park it at my parents' house, where my brother and his family lived. When I asked my parents, they said their house was full and we hadn't gotten along for the past decade. They would only let me park there if I paid rent equivalent to an apartment in my area, which was unaffordable for me as a jobless person trying to save my unemployment money. I might as well rent an apartment with that price. My parents called my camper an eyesore and told me to leave since we couldn't agree. My sister-in-law found it hilarious that I had to live in a camper, and my brother joined her in mocking me, calling me a homeless bum. I parked in a store parking lot that first night, scared out of my mind that someone might try to break in. I barely slept. I had nowhere else to go. Other relatives lived far away and my friends lived in apartments. I was attached to my area and didn't want to leave. I forwarded my mail to a friend's apartment, my only way to receive mail. Finding a stable place to park was quite a challenge. I spent months living a nomadic camper life while searching for a job similar to my previous one. During this time, I encountered numerous difficulties, from dealing with beggars and drug addicts to people demanding I leave because they considered my camper an eyesore. Once someone claimed to be part of an HOA and told me to move, even though I wasn't parked near any houses. When I questioned which HOA, they became aggressive and threatened me, so I moved to avoid trouble. To maintain a steady supply of electricity, I learned to use a long extension cord to recharge my camper batteries by plugging into any available outlet. This often meant sneaking around and using an outside outlet of a random building while parked on the street. Though I know it's not ideal, I needed to keep my refrigerator running. I had a small solar power bag for my phone, but I didn't have a generator, which would have been noisy and required fuel. So I did what I had to do. After months of this lifestyle, I finally secured a new job. I had to move to a neighboring city to find a non-retail job. I had promised myself never to work retail again after college, but I was close to breaking that promise. Although I was still receiving unemployment benefits, I had no stable place to live and didn't want to be jobless when the benefits ran out. Plus, I was incredibly bored with only reading, watching movies on a small portable DVD player, using my phone or laptop, and keeping track of where I could park and use public bathrooms. I envied the Japanese for their public bathhouses, which we could really use here. When I landed the job, I practically lived in the back lot of the building, in old employee parking spaces by the warehouse that no one else used because they were so far back they were almost forgotten. My boss, the company owner, liked this arrangement because I was always available for any shift as long as I had enough sleep. He even let me detach the camper from my truck and set it up in one of the spaces so I could drive around without it. I'm not sure if this was legal, but no one bothered us the entire time I lived there. I had few issues with trespassers. The security guards handled them. I was essentially on call all the time and worked nearly every day. My boss allowed me to plug my camper into the building for power and water, and I paid a small rent by working for free on Sundays, when the office was empty except for the janitor and security guard. I showered at a friend's apartment or at my local gym since the camper had no shower and only a portable toilet. I avoided using it to keep from having to empty it, a nasty chore, so I used other bathrooms whenever possible. I had a key to the warehouse and could use the bathroom there at any time. I became close friends with the night security guard. Heating the camper in winter was easy with a small electric heater, but summers were tough. Without AC, I got a used portable air conditioner to make it bearable. I earned a lot of overtime and learned new skills from my coworkers. Eventually, midway through the year, I was promoted to supervisor and started earning a better salary. This made me realize I needed a stable long-term living situation. I found a 3-bedroom manufactured home on a small property just 2 miles from work. I bought it for $10,000 less than the asking price, using nearly all my savings for a down payment and getting approved for a home loan. I no longer had to live in a camper. There was enough space to park my truck and set up the camper in the backyard, where it could serve as an extra space if needed. Once settled, I made the mistake of bragging about my new home on Facebook. My family saw the post, and that's when things got complicated. A few weeks later, my parents and brother, along with his family, showed up unannounced for a tour. I hadn't given them my address, so I still don't know how they found me. None of my friends admitted to telling them, and no family had visited me before, so I suspect they may have followed me home from work. It wouldn't surprise me. Once I opened the door, they practically barged in like a horde of overexcited tourists, immediately making themselves at home. They nosed around everywhere, and my sister-in-law kept flashing me this unsettling smirk. It wasn't until later that I figured out why, and it made me angrier than a bull on steroids stung by a hornet. My parents kept talking about how much extra space I had and how it was too much for someone like me who had no wife or kids. Sure, not now, but maybe someday. My brother kept pointing out that my house had more space than our parents and was closer to his job. Red flags all around, I know. Eventually, my brother, let's call him Dan for simplicity, asked to speak privately. Everyone else suddenly left the room and gathered on the front porch, making me realize they had planned something. Dan said the house was too much for me alone and suggested that he and his family move in because his wife was pregnant with their 4th child and my house was much closer to his job. He pointed out that I already had the camper, so I could just live in that while they took the main house. Not once did Dan mention offering rent, even though he had a good job. He also talked about making changes and setting curfews, saying I couldn't just walk in any time without notice. If it weren't my brother, I would have thought he had lost his mind. But Dan had long since gone off the deep end, thanks to our parents treating him like the center of the universe. I tried to speak, but he kept talking over me, as if I had no say in the matter. There was no way in hell I'd rent my house to him or his insufferable wife. I might consider renting to others to help pay off the mortgage, but not to them. I had seen stories like this online but never thought it would happen to me. Yet my parents, brother, and sister-in-law were a perfect fit for the roles of entitled narcissists. So I picked up my phone, set it to record, and held on to it. Dan didn't notice or care. He kept waving his arms and listing all the reasons why he needed my house. He acted like it was a done deal and even tried to shake my hand. That's when I finally stood my ground and said, "Hell no," loud enough that Dan stumbled backward. I rarely raised my voice to him like that, as I was usually punished for it by our parents, but this was my house, not theirs. My resolve was unyielding. I stood up and told him that my house was not up for grabs, and acting like he could move in just because they wanted it wouldn't change that. I bought my house for myself, and it wasn't my fault he kept having more kids and had to live with our parents because he couldn't afford to move out. Dan got as close to me as he could without touching me and said I didn't deserve the house and that he needed a better place for his family. I laughed in his face, saying that was total bull because I worked hard to buy my house. Of course, I deserved it. Dan started yelling that I had no wife or kids and didn't need all the space, so I might as well give it to him. I told him I wasn't giving him anything, and he hadn't even offered to pay rent if he moved in. I'd still be covering the entire mortgage on my own house without being able to live in it. Then Dan said he shouldn't have to pay rent because his family came first. After I kicked my parents, brother, and sister-in-law out for trying to force me to hand over my new house, I immediately went on social media and told the whole story to the family. It spread quickly, but you won't find it now because it has since been deleted and my profile is private. I posted about it because I knew my family would twist the event to make me the villain, and I was right. But I had about an hour to get my side out first, and I had video evidence to back up my story. No, I don't plan on showing the video here, so don't ask. Being proactive paid off because I got a decent number of family members on my side right away. My parents, brother, and sister-in-law must have planned to write their own post, but it was too late, so they didn't even bother trying to lie much. They had a few supporters, but not many. Most of our family already knew how entitled they were, so they quickly understood and accepted what happened. One person, whose identity I don't know, called me to rant that I was a horrible brother and needed to make way for a real family man. I just ended the call and blocked the number. It didn't happen again. The week went by and my parents showed up with Dan on my front porch, just as they said they would in their ultimatum. They rang my doorbell like crazy and pounded on the door until I finally answered. I opened the door just a crack, and they tried to shove their way in again. But I had installed a couple of latch chains and braced my body against the door. My father and brother demanded I let them in, but I said I was recording everything on camera and would call the police if they tried to force their way in again. My mother calmed them down and, in her most sickly sweet tone, asked if I was ready to let my brother move in. I told them to f off and never come back. My mother put on the crocodile tears and asked why I couldn't just do this for Dan because he's my beloved brother. I laughed and bluntly said I don't love him as a brother because he treated me like crap for years, and they encouraged him to do so. They are terrible parents, and he is a terrible brother. Then I told them to leave or I'd call the police ASAP. They all left surprisingly easily, apart from my mother's loud crying and the others giving me dirty looks. One could say making them leave was suspiciously easy. I thought the whole mess was over, but I should have taken them more seriously because they had other stupid plans. I came home later that week on Friday evening to find a moving truck and my brother's minivan parked in my driveway. It was Dan and his family. They were moving stuff in. He waved at me with a crap-eating grin. I was furious and told him and his family to stop, but my sister-in-law smugly said that, like it or not, they were moving in. Then in the most fake way, while tilting her head and puckering her lips, she said it was okay because my mommy allowed it and I should always listen to what my mommy tells me. I seethed with rage just hearing those words and looking at her smug face, so I locked myself in my truck and called the cops right away. When they realized what I was doing, my sister-in-law started pounding on my window and yelling at me to stop, saying I couldn't do this to her because she and Dan needed the house. She cried, "Why can't you just do this for Dan?" I responded, "F Dan, it's my damn house, not his." Then she threatened to key the side of my truck unless I stopped calling the police, all of which the 911 operator heard thanks to the window being slightly open. I told my sister-in-law that if she damaged my truck, I'd sue her, and she was smart enough to retreat. When the police arrived, Dan, my sister-in-law, and their kids had locked themselves in my house. I explained the situation to the cops and showed them my new driver's license with my current address. When we approached the front door, I noticed they'd changed the lock, and the old one was lying on the porch with the center drilled out. The drill and a Harbor Freight drill bit set were left right next to it. Could they have been any more foolish, leaving evidence out like that? I pointed out the broken lock and the drill, then detailed the events that had transpired. It seemed Dan had called our parents, as they showed up while I was talking to the cops. My parents immediately lied, claiming I had agreed to rent my house to my brother and his family. I countered, saying that was an easily provable lie. Dan and my sister-in-law finally emerged from my house with some papers, looking smug as if they'd outsmarted me. They had drawn up a fake rental agreement, but my signature wasn't on it. There was a signature, but it didn't resemble my handwriting at all. I doubted they had ever seen my signature, which was incredibly stupid on their part. I pointed out that it was blatant fraud and that if the cops investigated it would be clear. I warned that going to jail and court wouldn't benefit them, and it could even make Dan lose his job, his only means of supporting his family. I also mentioned I would get a lawyer and sue for damages if anything of mine was lost, stolen, or broken, and I'd call CPS for good measure. Dan turned white and looked terrified, but my mother stepped between us, insisting I should do this for Dan and live in the camper so they could have a family home. I shouted at her that if she thought it was such a great idea, she should let Dan have her house instead. The cops separated my mother from me and I loudly demanded they all leave immediately, or I'd press charges. I declared that they drilled out my lock to break in, the lease papers were obvious fakes, they badly forged my signature and I had recorded video of my sister-in-law attacking me. These were felonies I could ruin their lives with if I wanted, and if they didn't leave, I would do just that. The only reason I hadn't already was for Dan's kids, so they had one chance to get out. My parents finally realized they couldn't force me to give in. My mother surrendered, saying she'd put an end to this. She spoke quietly to my sister-in-law while my father talked to Dan. My sister-in-law instantly started crying loudly, ripping up the fake rental papers into tiny bits and tossing them like confetti, only to have an officer tell them to pick up the pieces or be cited for littering. The cops had, "I don't get paid enough for this," looks on their faces. Dan had to start telling his kids to load their stuff back into the moving truck. The kids were all crying, with the eldest sobbing that he wouldn't get his own room now. My sister-in-law and Dan tried one last pathetic attempt to guilt me with a sad family routine, gathering in a group hug facing me. They must have practiced it beforehand. All the kids had the same pleading look with quivering mouths. My sister-in-law kept rubbing her pregnant belly and tilting her head to look pitiful, and my brother made the saddest face he could, saying, "Please don't do this. We need to be able to live here." But I didn't budge and told them to keep packing. All the kids and my sister-in-law turned up the crying, and Dan yelled, "Are you satisfied with yourself? You've denied us a home because you're too selfish to share and help out family." I laughed like a maniac and retorted that what he was trying to do was taking, not sharing, and no amount of crying would make me let his family move in. He was no brother of mine anymore. He was just an entitled prick who thought he could take whatever he wanted from me like when we were kids. Dan started F-bombing me until the cops warned him to cool it or he'd end up in cuffs regardless of whether I wanted to press charges. He looked both scared and supremely pissed off. I asked the cops if they could stick around until my parents, brother, and sister-in-law had all left, and they said they weren't going anywhere until the situation was resolved. In fact, within a few minutes, the 2 cops became 4 as more arrived for some reason. That gave my parents extra incentive to get moving. I made Dan give me the keys to the new lock he'd put on my front door, although I got a new lock the next day anyway because I didn't know if he had copies of the keys. He was really reluctant to hand them over and ended up throwing them down the street and into a storm drain, telling me to get them myself. One of the cops scolded him for that and made him retrieve the keys. Dan had to pull off the grate to get at them and got pretty dirty in the process. When he finally got the keys back, he grumbled and then slammed them into my hand. I then told them all to leave and never come back. My mother threatened to disown me for this, as if that were some kind of threat. I voiced that to them, and in an overly sarcastic tone said something like, "Oh no, that means I won't get to come to any holidays with you guys where I always get treated like crap because Dan has always been your favorite. You treated me so badly growing up that if Dan ever needs an organ donor, I wouldn't give him anything. So do like you always told me when I was mistreated and suck it up." Final update. My parents told my brother to take my house because I don't have a family. I waited until after the new year to make an account and post, just in case more stuff happened, and it did. As previous readers know, my sister-in-law was making passive-aggressive posts on social media clearly directed at me, especially after she had her 4th baby in November. She kept posting the same repetitive nonsense, finding semi-clever ways to reword it but essentially complaining about living with my parents, the lack of space, and needing her own house. I know I sound dismissive, but after what I've been through with these people, you'd be ready to sarcastically play tiny violins in front of them too. They're just that bad. Since I waited until January to post, more happened, just as I thought. I mentioned before that I'd invited half the family for a Christmas Eve party at my house. Everyone I invited came, even though it was a 3 to 4 hour drive for them. They wanted to come and show their support. They praised me for working hard to get a house on my own and apologized for everything I'd been through. They asked why I didn't just take my camper and drive 3 hours back to them instead of living nearly homeless for so long, and I had to sheepishly admit I was very attached to living around here, where my best employment opportunities were. My hometown doesn't have many great job opportunities in my field, if any, and I wanted to make my own way as much as possible. An answer they overall accepted. We moved on to having a really nice party, the best I'd had in years. Some relatives brought CDs of great Christmas albums, and my favorite was the one my uncle brought of Ray Charles. He sings Christmas songs like no one else. It was a grand and happy time. I felt like, for once, I could just forget my past issues and enjoy the moment. But I wouldn't be writing this if it had stayed that way. About 2 hours into the party, you know who showed up. My parents, brother and sister-in-law walked in trying to look all smiles. They didn't even knock, just walked right in like they belonged there. I shut off the music and told them to leave immediately. They begged to stay and said they brought gifts. One of my uncles stood up and yelled at them before I had a chance to speak. He said they didn't deserve to be in my home or my life after the crap they pulled months earlier, and several other relatives backed him up. This uncle, my mother's brother, used to adore her until he found out about the stuff that went on between me and my parents. My grandparents, my mother's parents, as old as they are, hurriedly stepped in and told my parents that if they wanted to make amends with me, it was far too soon. They expressed their immense disappointment in them for the past year. They'd hidden their favoritism for my brother from prying eyes for a long time, but no one was fooled anymore. They needed to make a serious effort to treat me like a son if they ever wanted to be in my life again. Then they turned to Dan and my sister-in-law and said they were tired of the repetitive nonsense my sister-in-law kept posting. They told her to let it go already because my house would not become their new home. My sister-in-law reverted to her usual crying routine, throwing a tantrum about how she should be the one living here and not me. She sat down and complained that it wasn't fair I had this house to myself when I had no family, while she had 4 kids that needed more space. She just wanted a better place to live and feel like a real mom. It was petty of me, but I loudly pointed out that she sucked as a mother because she let my mom do most of the parenting while she sat on her butt all day, playing on her phone or spending all of Dan's money. She had the nerve to complain about it. I even joked that I was surprised her baby didn't get drunk from her breast milk since she drank so much booze. That comment got me some stares. My sister-in-law demanded to know if I was calling her a bad mom. I said the evidence speaks for itself. If she wanted to afford to move out of my parents' house someday, she needed to use her college degree, get a job, and save money. My mom already did most of the childcare for my brother's kids, so she'd have plenty of time after her baby got a little older. My brother's eldest, a 7-year-old, ran up and started kicking and screaming at me for yelling at his mom. He kept at me about how his mom said I was the bad guy who made her cry and didn't let them live here. My brother pulled his son away, but the other relatives jumped back in, and it turned into a family intervention against my sister-in-law and brother. She was crying, her new baby was crying, her kids were crying, hell, even Dan was nearly in tears from the verbal lashing he was getting. He ended up just sitting on the ottoman by the front door, looking like a complete wreck. He couldn't look anyone in the eye. He couldn't even say 2 words to me, not with a house full of angry people ready to judge him if he tried to act like the golden child again. If they weren't there to hold him back, I bet this would have ended up like when he tried to take my house months earlier. By this point though, he'd been so thoroughly humiliated that his and my parents' reputation in the family was completely destroyed because the masks were off. Soon after, my parents, brother, and sister-in-law all left in defeat. The party resumed, and we all avoided speaking of what had just happened for the rest of the evening. Since most of the adults had been drinking, everyone stayed the night at my house. I even let some of them sleep in the camper to ensure there was enough space. It makes a good guest house. My relatives had wanted a tour of it earlier and couldn't believe I'd been living in it for around 2 years. They asked a lot of questions about what summer and winter were like and so on. I was up earlier than everyone else on Christmas morning and had a fresh pot of coffee and some ibuprofen ready for those suffering from spiked eggnog hangovers. They complimented me on being a way nicer host than my parents ever were, and we all agreed to do this again next Christmas. After Christmas, my sister-in-law finally stopped making posts that were obvious digs at me and even deleted the old ones. But shortly after the new year, she posted again, complaining about how she tried to convince my parents to get a camper like mine so it could be set up in the backyard. That way, Dan and his family could use the whole house as their family home. My parents vehemently turned down that idea. They were not going to be pushed out of their own home, let alone their master bedroom. The post was only up for a couple of days before my sister-in-law removed it, and she has hardly posted anything since. She loves to complain, but if a tree falls and no one is around to hear it, can it still complain? My sister-in-law seems to have realized there's no point in doing it when no one is listening. And Dan can't afford to move his family out on his salary alone anytime soon. If they end up expecting another child in the next few years, I won't be surprised. Things have mellowed down for me since then, and I've even invited friends over for a poker night. I suck at poker because I can never remember the rules, but so what? We get to drink beer and eat junk food while being merry idiots. We loaded up on Whoppers from Burger King and just had a great time, enjoying the evening and getting pleasantly drunk. I think maybe around summer I'll look into possibly dating someone. I'm not exactly getting younger, so fingers crossed that goes well. My camper just sits idle in my yard now, and I admit there are days I go out there just to spend time in it. After living in it for 2 years, it feels like my second home. Maybe one day I'll actually use it for camping as intended. I've never been camping. My parents considered it a waste of time, so it would be a completely new experience for me. This pretty much marks the end of what happened. My parents, brother and sister-in-law have been staying clear of me. In fact, they've gone back to acting like I don't exist, just like before I bought a house. Not that it bothers me at all, it's better this way. But they'll inevitably come back in some way. I know they will. I just wonder what kind of stupid thing they'll do next. If anything notable like this happens again, I'll make another post if this account is still active.